I'd like to warn our affiliates that we may be going long tonight. This time we watch Season 4, Episode 24, Manos, The Hands of Fate.
And now we'll have a ball.
Hold on, our Manos Club has been invaded by a woman.
It's been a long time, Beth. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah.
I can't be happier to be part of the Manos show.
It's also the first episode that we're recording live with all three of us in the same room.
Yes, this is the Beatles rooftop concert of podcasts.
We've literally never done this, even before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been a few episodes where Adam and I were in the same room, and we were supposed to do, Beth, our episode on Squirm together in the same room, but that's when the pandemic started.
Mm-hmm.
And we never got to do it. So this time, all three of us in the same space, in the same room. Oh boy, the excitement is palpable. Also, it's our 100th episode.
This is what we waited around for, guys.
Mm-hmm.
We needed something special for the number 100.
Yep, this is definitely going to be most people's first episode. So welcome.
Welcome. We'll try to hold your hand. It's going to be maybe a little loosier, maybe a little goosier than usual, but it's going to be some fun.
Oh man, but where are they going to learn all the tedious lore of It's Just a Show's past?
Well, they can look in the back catalog, I guess, or ask on the forums. I don't know.
Consult the wiki.
Go to the TV Tropes page about us. That'll give you most of it. Also, it's very exciting. You know, actually, there's a lot of follow-up that we would normally do here from our previous episodes on Bride of the Monster and so forth. But, you know, we'll get to that another time. This is Manos' hour. But also, it's Adam's birthday.
Yay!
Yay!
I did it.
And now I'm going to wheel out this giant cake, and Donald Pleasance is going to pop out of the top.
Oh,
we do have a cake to celebrate our 100th episode and Adam's birthday in the other room.
What?
Which we'll have at the break.
Happy 100th birthday, Adam.
I know. I outlived my idol.
That's all that could fit on the cake's top.
Also,
that's a happy birthday,
the
McGaggy.
universe did get together to give a present to Adam.
Oh
Here
my
you go.
God.
Open it up so that everybody can see it at home.
Well, hold on. I got to get some ASMR going.
We need that Foley. We need that Foley now.
What could it be now? Da, 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 da. My God. as I could only hope, it is a Donald Pleasance action figure that is extraordinary, but it comes with a Jamie Lee Curtis action figure, since this is from the film Halloween 2, 1981's Halloween 2, and the Jamie Lee Curtis action figure sort of looks like a soap carving of Tim Curry.
It wishes it did. That would be amazing.
The Donald Pleasance is incredible.
Yeah, Donald Pleasance looks spot on.
And I would know if this was off by even a hair.
Well, now the two of them can get married.
Finally.
As they always dreamed.
That's how the movie should have ended.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. It seemed ridiculous for us to have a world in which a Donald Pleasance action figure existed and that you didn't have it.
I mean, that's just cruel. At least until someone finds those Puma Man action figures and sends one our way.
Beth, it's not your birthday. I didn't get you anything.
I'm all right.
Okay, good.
Just happy to be part of the show.
Are you happy to talk about Manos, the Hands of Fate?
You know, Manos.
I have so many things to say.
All right. Let's not waste any more time. Let's go.
Oh no, bad news. I didn't watch the episode.
This time we watch Season 4, Episode 24, Manos, The Hands of Fate.
But first, a short, Hired, Part 2. You'll remember from Hired Part 1 that there was trouble at the Chevrolet store. Jimmy and the other new hires aren't performing as well as they should, and the boss is upset. What's wrong with these kids today? The boss meets with his father for some porch lemonade, and as the father swats mosquitoes away and puts a handkerchief on his head, he asks whether Jimmy has been given the in-depth personal training that the boss received when he was new to the job. What? Spend time with your employees instead of throwing them into the deep end? Offer future generations the same advantages you had? With these radical ideas in his head, the boss starts taking a more hands-on approach. And the results? Sales, sales, sales. And the end.
And now for our feature presentation. It was supposed to be a fun family vacation. Margaret and Michael, their little daughter Debbie, and their ill-behaved poodle Peppy cruise their stately convertible through beautiful El Paso, making their way to Valley Lodge for their summer holiday. But these are pre-GPS times, and Michael quickly gets lost in the dusty back roads of the Chihuahuan Desert. Michael keeps insisting that they're headed in the right direction. The sign pointed this way. But he finally gives up and stops at a rundown building where a strange bearded man, leaning on a tall cane topped with an iron hand, watches them intently from the door. Margaret hesitates. She wants to get directions from the teens they saw necking in their car a few miles back. But her husband presses. Perhaps this is the Valley Lodge, in which case they have some choice words for their travel agent. Speaking in a halting tone, the mysterious man declares that his name is Torgo, and that he takes care of the place while the master is away. Mike tries to get directions from the caretaker, but Torgo only intones, "There is no way out of here. It will be dark soon. There is no way out of here." Things only get worse from there. Their car won't start. Peppy is mysteriously disemboweled. Torgo molests Margaret, and little Debbie runs away into the wilderness where she stumbles onto a satanic altar, peopled with catatonic cultists. Michael, Margaret, and Debbie realize they are in grave danger, but conversely, the family's visit seems to have disturbed the cult's equilibrium. A rebellious Torgo visits his catatonic master and his 6 slumbering wives to declare that he wants Margaret for himself. He's through with the lot of them. Springing into action, Torgo proceeds to knock out Mike, tie him to a pole, and then take a nap? While the caretaker snoozes, the master revives. He slowly rises from his catatonic state and confers with his now living wives about what to do with the trapped family. The wives agree to kill Michael and take Margaret as one of their own, but they are at loggerheads over what to do with Debbie. As the oldest wife intones, "The man, yes. The child, no." The master pulls rank. "The child must die." The master leaves, intending to punish Torgo for his insolence. But in his absence, the wives continue arguing, eventually coming to blows over Debbie's fate. Things seem like they might be turning around for our beleaguered family. The master's grip on his acolytes appears to be slipping. Mike manages to free himself from Torgo's binds and escape with his wife and daughter into the sagebrush. And what is more, the local sheriff and deputy, informed by the teen couple about the family's presence, seem to be on the cusp of finding and rescuing them. But Mike and Margaret make a fatal mistake. They decide to return to the lodge, barricade themselves inside, and shoot anyone who breaks in with Michael's revolver. But the weapons of man have no effect on the master. He has regained his otherworldly powers by sacrificing both Torgo and his rebellious first wife to the demon god Manos. Cut to the near future. A couple of best friends on holiday follow an oddly familiar road into the desert. They eventually come upon a rundown building with a strange cardigan man watching them intently from the door. "My name is Michael," he says haltingly. "I take care of the place while the master is away." The camera pans to the master's altar, which is now flanked by 2 new acolytes, Margaret and Debbie.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, in the prologue, Joel has given the bots new protocols where they praise his every move. The experiment is short-lived, however, as we return from the break, and Joel has returned the bots to normal, and they've gone back to insulting him, which, seems a little harsh. Anyway, on to the invention exchange. The Mads present us with a surprisingly useful, and I would say a force for good, the chocolate bunny guillotine. Yes, you can bite the heads off chocolate bunnies with your hands free of chocolate mess. This is a great invention and needs to be in stores now. Joel comes up with something actually probably a little sinister. It is as if the roles are reversed, as Joel has come up with the cartooner, which takes the intellectual properties from the funny pages and mixes and matches them up so that we get something funny, or at the very least, anarchic and unexpected. It ends with the immortal line, "Ziggy got Garfield neutered, now that's funny." Joel tries to do a road trip sketch in segment 2, but Tom and Crow are too upset because Cambot is showing on a green screen footage from Manos, the Hands of Fate, and it gets so out of hand that Gypsy's big scene in the sketch is ruined. This is interrupted by Frank, who apologizes for the quality of Manos while about to towel off Dr. Forrester. In segment 3, Joel and the bots dream up what monsters they'd be if they could be monsters. Monsters being, of course, normal people with one exaggerated feature. Now, I must raise a question. The exaggerated features that they talk about, Tom clearly says that he would have a big droopy binky.
What I'd do, see, get this, I'd have one big droopy pinky, and I'd drag it behind me.
And I refuse to believe he said anything else. What is a binky? This is clearly a Midwestern thing. Listeners, please write in to Scruff McGruff, Chicago, Illinois, 60652 if you have the answer. What is a binky? Segment 4, Joel cosplays as the Master with Crow as his hellhound, but Tom's not impressed because he looks like Maud. Dr. Forrester calls this time to apologize about Manos. In the final segment, Crow and Tom reenact the wrestling wives scene while Gypsy provides a cappella musical accompaniment. Frank, in Deep 13, is reading Andy Capp and reveals to an impatient Dr. Forrester that the pizza they ordered is late because he ordered from Torgo's Pizza. Torgo's a delivery boy who might have stuffed their complimentary crazy bread in his pants. And this explains, after their 2-hour wait, why Dr. Forrester and TV's Frank spit out their pizza when they realize it's still warm despite being 2 hours late. The end.
Now, was the idea there that he was sitting on them, or he put the pizza in his pants as well?
I think he's warming it like a rooster. Either that, or there's a far worse joke in which he f***ed the pizza. Which I don't think is what they were going for. But the image of Torgo f***ing a pizza is very amusing to me.
Well, it's just like, because he's already got the crazy bread down there, so how else could he really fit down there?
And you know, say what you will about this film, but there's a certain element of physical comedy genius in the performance of Torgo.
Oh, we'll get into that.
But yes, we are talking about the last exit to Springfield of the Mystery Science Theater 3000 verse. This is the most famous episode of the show. This is it. This is the As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly of MST3K. This is the most famous one. This is Clown Funeral. This is whatever the most famous episode of Friends is. I assume it's one with the monkey in it.
So, do you like this episode?
I adore this episode. We were talking about this, you and I, Chris, last episode. I think this is the most quotable episode of MST3K. There's a lot of great lines. It has one of my favorite jokes of the series, which is, why does every frame of this movie look like someone's last known photograph?
Which is extremely accurate. That's what it looks like.
Yes, because like the movie does look like Vietnam footage. The question is like, or no, the objection is like, the Mads have sent us a snuff film, haven't they? Is extremely funny. And Hired is no slouch. It has one of my, goat lines of the series, which is, flying elves are back. This is an extremely quotable episode. It shows off just what Best Brains can do, and it does what the show does best, which is show off an offbeat movie and not skewer it, but complement it, offering an alternative entertainment experience that enriches what you're watching and also shows just what talented comedians the Best Brains people were.
It is astonishing that, especially when I'm trying to show other people Mystery Science Theater 3000, the only ones that have really resonated with people who don't become instant fans, who can really just take it or leave it, is Manos. Like, I have friends who they never got into Mystery Science Theater 3000, but they still quote lines from Manos, The Hands of Fate. Their favorite one is, "Tell you what, Debbie's out of here." That's become a big one with my friends. I feel like Debbie's got the best lines. My personal favorite is, "Oh, the dog is sharp again, Mummy."
That is a good one. One of the things that's interesting, of course, I love the episode too. Anybody who listened to our last episode knows that I'm a big fan of this one, and most people are, but one person who isn't is Joel.
Yeah, I was shocked to read in the foreword to the book written by the daughter in the film, Jackie Neiman Jones. He writes in his foreword that he can think that there's about 30 better episodes of MST3K than this, and where I can think of like 2 that are on par with it, but none that are better than this.
He seems to have been genuinely taken by surprise when he found out what like a phenomenon Manos had become.
And I think what this speaks to is 2 things, and it's interesting because I watched the special feature on the DVD, which is called Hotel Torgo, which is great, in which Frank and Trace and Joel and Mary Jo are all sitting down talking about their Manos experience and reminiscing about it. And for them, it was just another day, and it was an especially hard day because this is an especially punishing film to watch. But I think through that hard work, which was probably not very fun to do, and I think memories watching this episode are tainted by that for them, by giving us something this unique. Like I said, this is Manos with all these jokes thrown at it, and everyone's a winner. I think that they made, this is already a specialty show. MST3K is not for everybody, but this is a special thing already. This is a special episode of a special show, and I think that's why it has such a devoted audience. But I also think this is why this one shines. It's so weird that it could even draw in the normies to be like, yeah, I'll watch that one.
Yeah, we should point out that, sort of like how we pointed out last episode with Bride of the Monster, that it was delightful and unusual to have a episode whose film had a major feature film about it, about the creation of it. This one is delightful in that there is a book that is coming from one of the best possible sources for a book about one of these kinds of movies. It's written by someone who was a child and in the movie, whose father was one of the leads in the movie, and the father is still living, and also just has tremendous amounts of affection and love for this movie.
Yeah.
Didn't go on to do anything else that wasn't related to Manos. Has been in a few Manos follow-ups, which we'll talk about, I guess, but did not become an actor, but wrote this incredibly personal, incredibly revealing behind-the-scenes look at as much as she could discover in years and years of researching this, of the different people involved. And it's a very readable, I mean, it's an amateur writer, right? It gets repetitive, but that's fine. It's completely charming, it's completely readable, and if you love this episode and you love this movie, you absolutely need to read Growing Up with Manos.
And to that point, what is so unique about Manos, and how, and we'll try to kind of figure out why it became a phenomenon and later, but it's just like, Mystery Science Theater 3000 did a lot of movies. They've done hundreds, but I think this is the only one that has subsequently got its own like book treatment, like it's, people want to know about how this little weirdo sandwich got made.
One of the nice things in Jackie's book is Joel's introduction, which is short, but which is filled with goodies. And one of the things that he talks about is the relationship that MST3K has with the movies it's working on. He refers to it as a host body, which is an interesting idea, and says, I think of MST3K as a variety show that rode on the back of a movie. We weren't there to point out the flaws of the film and make fun of the lack of quality, as much as we saw the lines and situations each film presented as a chance to cross-reference it with something interesting, to tell a joke, to do an impression, or to sing a song. And I think that's, first off, a really great perspective to have. I think a lot of people do look at MST3K as all about making fun of bad movies, which at times in its career, it did become that sometimes. And that's not my favorite part of the MST3K canon.
No.
But at its best, it's taking these movies, it's looking at them. It may be saying, wow, this is a bad movie, but it's engaging with it in some really interesting ways. And this movie is particularly interesting because it both gives them so much to work with and nothing to work with.
Yes. Well, I mean, I've always been a big supporter of the time suck movies, like the Coleman Francis trilogy, which we've already covered on It's Just a Show. And this is one of them. This is probably the time suck movie where sometimes the shots aren't even in focus. There is a meandering, a simple yet surprisingly murky plot, and you're just waiting for something to happen, and yet things are constantly happening on screen. It's not like the movie is without incident, and yet it also feels like nothing has happened and that we're in the same room.
Well, before we get on to the qualities of the movie itself, then, the episode, maybe let's talk about the skits. And the riffing is going on all cylinders. I honestly think that the first segment of riffing of the movie itself, like the first between commercial breaks of the movie is one of the funniest such segments that they ever did. I was physically pained rewatching it from all the laughing I was doing. And that is a delightful and rare feeling that few episodes managed to do for me. Do you have any favorite moments in the riffing or the sketches, either of you?
Well, I do think it was maybe because they had established themselves as more augmenting a movie as opposed to kind of pointing out all its flaws, that this did feel a little bit unique because they did have a lot of moments where they were just pointing out the technical stuff. They didn't do the most obvious stuff. Like they didn't, point out when the clapboard was in the scene or anything like that. But just things like Crow's comment, like I'm pretty sure they just dissolved into the same scene. Like just like
it's just one guy.
Yeah,
it's just one guy
doing all those voices.
Yeah, it sounds like that, but from what I've read, it was actually two voices because Bill Jennings, who played the sheriff, and Hal Warren, obviously, did their own dubbing.
And yet the joke still works because they sound identical.
Okay. Well, we'll get to that as well. Any other bits that you like?
Well, I think the my favorite is when they notice something extremely subtle, which is when the footage has been slowed down.
Oh,
So
yes.
Tom starts to deliver his line very, very slowly, and then it speeds up, and he goes a little too fast before settling into a normal rhythm. Like it's a perfectly timed, exquisite joke. That is probably like my favorite inventive kind of bit in the riffing. I think that. I love the MST3K conversations that come from the wonderful thing that MST3K does, which is overthinking a movie in a way that plays with the movie as opposed to pushes the movie down or tries to act superior to the movie. And that's the monster conversation. And I love the monster conversation. It's got some very funny acting from Joel as he reacts in horror to the bot's various suggestions, and it's got one of Trace's best delivered lines, which is "Big knees, run with it." So I think it's great, and it ends with this like lovely heartwarming moment where Joel keeps poking the bots and saying, "It's like, yes, you are a monster." It's such a it's wonderful, it's playful, it's creative, and it's clever, and those are all the things I want from an MST3K episode.
So I guess I should admit I'm already on record for a Proposition Deep 13 that I don't think this is the absolute strongest riffing they've ever done. I think it starts off strong, but peters out near the end once like the kind of catatonic venom of the movie kind of gets into their veins a little bit. And I don't find the sketches to be the strongest, save for the very last one, which took a long time for me to get, when I was just like, when Crow and Servo are in the diaphanous gowns of the wives, and and I never understood why Gypsum's in the background just making a lot of noise until I realized that she was trying to do the soundtrack. And then I was just like, this is brilliant. It's just like it's a perfect rendition of that crazy soundtrack.
There's a lot in the sketches that I enjoy. One of the things that I particularly enjoy about these sketches, especially like when it first came out, was that I had been enjoying the sort of, wait, are Dr. F and Frank a couple thing going on? And they you get so many little behind the scenes moments in this one where they're just playing with it. It's like, Frank has to go towel down Dr. Forrester after he gets out of the shower and so forth. They're like being incredibly domestic to each other, and that's just sweet and adorable.
Yeah.
Between this and the last episode, actually, which were some of the first I ever saw, the kind of comfy homosociality / even homoeroticism that they were willing to do like this early in the 90s openly was just so awesome. I mean, part of the joke that they have later on is when Crow starts to talk about how Joel would not make a good master, and he starts talking about his physical features, and then he's like, and quite frankly, you blush in the most adorable way.
Yeah, which is true. Okay, so it's a good episode. I think we can all agree, and Joel is wrong and should be punished.
Yeah, he's never been more wrong.
But the movie, is this a good movie? It's not a good movie. No. Is it a good, bad movie, so to speak? Does the movie have any redeeming features to it? We will decide this now.
Welcome to Crossfire.
I should mention that we do we actually do prep before this, and so we had a Slack document, and I had just put in, like, as an idea, my thought, like, in defense of Manos, let's talk about, some things that maybe they do right or things that are intriguing. And then the first thing that Adam does is counterpoint, this movie sucks.
Well, okay, that's sort of the parameters. Let's look at a few different aspects of the film and see what we think about it. First off, we're going to start with the plot, or the plot twists, such as they are. I mean, you went into loving detail in your summary about what the plot is. You hit basically every beat
You're welcome, everyone.
For a 70-minute movie.
Your summary is longer than the movie itself.
What do we think of the plot?
Well, I just remember that I was watching one of the Turkey Days, and they had Manos, and they had also a Coleman Francis movie, which Coleman Francis is one of Adam's favorites. And Trey Spilliot described skydivers as kind of like Manos without the lucid plot. And to me, and then I had, cause this was a teenager, I had to look up the term lucid, and lucid means like it's you can notice it. It's something that it is conceivable throughout. And I do think that unlike a lot of movies that they watch that are just well nigh incoherent, there is like some sense of what is going on, what the stakes are, what is happening, and where things are going. And so I've always found that to be one of the least weak parts of the movie. And even for the point that the things that they don't talk about, which perhaps was just laziness or perhaps just not enough time, are actually intriguing because they weren't fully described. Like, what is going on with this cult? Are they dead? I think they're supposed to be dead. What are their motivations? There's some suggestion, and I kind of put that in my summary, is just like they don't seem to want anyone else to join, or at least Torgo doesn't, but some sort of like sclerosis is kind of set in where like they don't like each other anymore, and the master is losing a lot of his power, and something is going on that they don't quite get into, and I find that kind of intriguing.
Well, I would say that what's interesting about the movie is, I mean, stepping aside from the plot, what's interesting about the movie is the kinds of things that you only get from people who've never thought through what a movie should do or look like or be. So you do have all of those weird curly cues and questions where the answer, if you asked, if you could get the director on the phone and ask him, it's like, hey, what did this actually mean? The answer would be yes, no, or I don't know.
Right.
That's what it would really boil down to. I think that like you can see the hints of things. It's like, I don't even think, for instance, like you've got what is a sex and magic cult. Which I already hate as an idea. But you've got this sex and magic cult, and you've got a quote unquote normal family going off on vacation. Oh no, their whole lives have been turned upside down by the sex and magic cult because a satyr came by and invited them in. And that's absolutely insane. That's sort of Mad Libs kind of writing. And I think that's really what happened in the writing process, is that there are these ideas there. Like I said, there's this contrast between the family and the cult. But to do that, you would have to have some idea of like, okay, well, what does the cult mean? And is there a connection, if any, could be made between what the spouse, what the wife is thinking and wants, and what even the daughter wants, since they both end up brides? It's like, is there some element of temptation for them? Does little Debbie actually want to be an adult and see appeal in these women? Is there an element of sexual repression going on with the married couple who are ostensibly our leads? Like, that would be interesting and an idea and a theme. But all of these things are just kind of like buried in the movie, like so much cat turds in a box. And so it's a fascinating, like, I think this movie's fascinating, and I think it's a great bad movie, but I also think there's no there.
I mean, yeah, I agree with all of that. It is a very lucid plot compared with a lot of MST3K fodder. Mm-hmm. Certainly, this is, this is a movie that I understood the first time I watched it, unlike Wild World of Batwomen or whatever. or even like Pod People's 19 different threads that are going on at the same time.
Woof.
This is fairly clear. It also, like, the entire movie was made so that you could have models wrestling in underwear,
Yeah.
which they then refused to do because they didn't know that that was what they were signing up for. So they decided that they were going to wear the most grandma underwear they could. So it's completely, I assume, not titillating.
I can confirm that it's not.
And that was the way that this movie was supposed to make money, which was the entire point. Like, this movie was supposed to be the quick out the door, let's use this to raise more capital, to get more movies made, to start the whole empire rolling. And it didn't work, obviously. But like, let's make the movie was the director's great idea, which is why, you've got a plot that's going to lead to a few titillating occasions, but it doesn't go anywhere because the main person behind it doesn't care. Interestingly, a lot of the other people involved in the making of the movie cared quite a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. And like this has been described as like one man's very flawed vision, but this was an assembly. This was an assemblage of people who came together. They were led on by Hal P. Warren's enthusiasm, but they were all in. Every single person was basically all in on this.
Yeah, he was less a director more than he was like a ringmaster, and everyone's kind of showing off what they can do in the circus that is Manos.
Okay, but let's stay focused. Plot twist at the end. Michael's the new Torgo.
I hate it.
I think it's genuinely kind of affecting.
What?
It's the best acting he does in the whole movie.
Yes, because he doesn't have to act.
But he recreates the halting kind of goaty like Torgo, which again, like I'm like, oh, you're supposed to be a goat. Is that why you're like a satyr goat that you're speaking so haltingly?
He is not as committed as John Reynolds Torgo is.
No, not at all. But I thought that was the one moment like when I first watched it, I was like, oh, like it was actually a little bit like I had that horror feeling like, oh no.
All right, well, that's a good jumping off point for our next topic, which is the characters. Torgo's the breakout star of the cast, obviously.
Yeah, I don't know how much I should say. Like, so he's played by John Reynolds, who tragically took his own life before this movie came out. Jackie Neiman Jones's book has quite a bit about his background and some hints about why he might have been like a very conflicted person who had some demons in his closet. But basically he's a very talented but very terribly shy man who was on LSD a lot, and for that reason, like, one of the things that's so affecting about the Torgo performance is he's a good actor, but those ticks and starts, that's the LSD. And you can't, like, even the best actor can't really.
I'm not sure that's true.
Really?
Yeah, he was also like a heavy method actor.
Yeah, he was deep into Torgo's psyche.
Yeah, and he like sort of wasn't like a lot of heavy method actors, was not leaving the part when the day of shooting was over, apparently. Like the book talks about that as well. I don't know. I think that was very much part of the sort of weird, unheimlich, goaty satyr feel that he was going for. I don't know. Because also, like, a lot of the cast were on LSD and nobody else is doing this.
That's fair enough. A lot of people were attributing it to that. And maybe it's because I don't know a lot of people who do LSD a lot. So I don't know if that those kinds of like shakes come in. But yeah, he's like a really good actor.
Yes, I'll say on authority from a friend of mine who's done LSD a lot that it does not give you the shakes and weird ticks.
I've never heard that, and I'll trust your friend.
Yes, who will go unnamed.
I think also the other really good actor is Tom Neiman, the master. I think he does a very good role. He's certainly one of the most dedicated creative forces behind the movie. He was also the art director. He was the one who made the painting. He was the one who made the sculptures of hands. He did all sorts of things for no money.
He did it for shares in future profits.
He did do it for shares in the profits, which of course paid handsomely. But yeah, he was just the sort of person who really wanted to make art and do stuff and was willing to go the extra mile for a creative project and did it all. And like decided that the part needed a little zhuzhing up and came up with the whole priestly, oh, Manos.
Holy art thou, holy art thou, holy art thou.
And, MST said that Tom Neiman was a darling of the local theater scene.
Mhm.
And
As was John Reynolds.
Yeah, and I think you could feel that. I mean, let's be frank. John Reynolds steals the show.
Sure.
It's Torgo's world. We're just living in it, and but he's actually perfect for. And again, I don't think this is intentional. I think this is something that they kind of like fell into, because Tom Neiman is not great as a personification of evil or power. What he is great is suggesting someone who had a greater hold on his wives because he was that force and has lost it.
Yeah.
That's what he's good at. And I don't think anybody was really thinking about that.
Well, I mean, the other thing is, it's a very different. Apparently, they were friends and talked about acting and the process of acting, and it's including like Stanislavski. Is that his name?
Yeah.
So, but they have extremely like polar opposite acting techniques.
Mhm.
Like Tom Neiman is very stagey. You can tell that this is a man who mostly, it's very like acts with his body and does very exaggerated faces, and is used to wearing a lot of cake makeup.
Now, question. If Tom Neiman is stagey, what is Torgo? What is
Shaky.
that performance?
Stagey versus shaky.
No, but it's true that like Tom is declaiming. The master declaims. Torgo is shaking his entire body in satyr energy.
I love the note in Jackie's book that the idea of Torgo being a satyr might have been something that Warren made up later because there was no reference to it in the original script.
Oh, no. I think it was in the original script, but then he realized that it would be way too expensive because he was supposed to be naked and have fur everywhere.
That's right.
And then they were like, we can't afford that.
No.
And then it just became knees. But I'm not sure whether John Reynolds knew about the satyr thing or not, or whether it's not clear, and it's not in the film. Like the film doesn't refer to him as a satyr or a goat man or anything like that. He's just shaky,
which just adds to it. And he's got those bizarre things where there's a depends joke in the episode, and that's what it looks like. It's really bizarre. But that's the thing the movie has that adds to it. It adds to its charm and its mystique, is that Torgo Torgo is a weirdly alive kind of character, just because you see this and it's like, I have never seen anything like this in a movie before. This performance, this depiction of a character, and you just have no idea, because it's again, they didn't think about it. It's like Warren just wrote, it's like, oh, and the master will have a toady, he will have a Renfield.
Mm-hmm.
But they ended up with something so much less and so much more.
So another character that I want to bring up, and kind of the only other one that I really care about, is Michael the dad, played by the director himself.
Yeah.
Which is such an amazing and unlikable character.
Yeah.
Again, seemingly not on purpose. Seemingly this eviscerating takedown of 1960s masculinity.
So much so. I mean, and it sounds like Hal himself was a quite likable, personable guy. So it seems like he was trying to do some kind of persona here of maybe like a serious dad or like a paterfamilias, and it just goes flat.
More than that, I mean, it's suggested in the book. Well, no, it's flat out stated that Warren was a man of charisma, but boy, you can't find it in one frame of this.
No, I mean, the book also points out that like he had no charisma as a director on set. He was working and trying to get things done. Like, it was the worst Cormanism, right? It was just, we're going to work, we're going to print it, we're going to move on.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't as friendly and glad handling and like trying to make a sale with every smile as he seems to have been in the rest of his life. But yeah, just the fact that like the dad is going around never accomplishing anything he sets out to do demanding. I mean, you said that they encountered the satyr who invites them inside, but like, no, the satyr doesn't want them to come in. The dad just insists this must be a hotel and we must have to stay here now. Therefore, get our bag. Well, I guess.
And he welcomes them in.
Yeah, and Torgo's like, yeah, okay, I'll get your bags. But like, but it's so the opposite. Like, he puts his family in danger because, as is already set out by that point in the film, that early on, like, he will not stop and ask for directions. He doesn't listen to his wife. He doesn't. He's just in that mindset of like, well, no, this is what I'm going to do, and therefore it's going to work out great when it doesn't.
I also think I want to talk about Diane Marie a little bit.
Diane, of course, played the mom of the family.
She can't act,
No.
but she totally admitted that during her first interview with Hal. She's like, I've never acted before in my life. What she is a model, and that does give her a really strong presence, I would say. Like, when the movie was remastered, one of the first shots they used to kind of get the Kickstarter going was a remastered still of Diane Marie, and it was just so striking that really became what pushed the picture along. Not of the master and his beautiful Cal, not of Torgo and his amazing kind of Van Gogh visage. Like, no, it was Diane Marie, because she does have a presence on screen. Hal, I think, kind of recognized that, and it's like, even though you can't act, I think you're just going to be like, and yes, he liked the ladies too, but I think it was just like, you have a presence, and maybe that we can draw on.
She had not even been a model at this point. She was just trying to look for work as a model, having been sort of stuck in El Paso where her parents lived. Was on a road trip, but the car broke down. Was like, I needed modeling work.
And they passed by the Valley Lodge.
Basically, they said, oh yeah, I know this guy who needs models for a thing. You know, like, this is the same modeling agency where they got the wives from. And Hal took one look at her and was like, you'll be our lead. And it's clear that Hal was hot for her.
Yeah.
As part of the interview process, Hal said, okay, now take your top off. Now, this was not something Diane was expecting, and perhaps happily for her, her mom was just in the other room, which Hal didn't know. And the mom comes storming in. It was like, oh no. And Hal's like, oh, I was just testing. We're good. You don't have to do that. It's fine. You got the part. We're good. And apparently was very professional from then on. But, you know, clearly had a thing for Diane.
Yeah, I have a feeling that Warren probably thought to himself, it's like, you know, half the time this works.
I mean, I don't get the sense that he tried that on any of the other wives, because they
haven't reported that.
Yeah, they seem to have been quite surprised at how little they were expected to wear on set. What else? Are there any other striking visuals?
Well, I mean, I know that the camera gets a lot of rap for not being a very good camera. It was like a 8mm, right? And it only, of course, legendarily could only shoot for 30 seconds at a time. It was meant for war correspondence. I think that's what it was originally intended for. Like, just, you know, where sound wasn't really an issue, or just trying to get quick visuals overseas. But it can capture reds. Like, it has a beautiful, there's just the reds and darker colors in this movie I found, and the whites. I don't know, if this had been a black and white movie, I don't think we'd even be talking about it. There's something really strong about the colors in this movie.
I don't know. I mean, even the remastered version is muddy to me visually. There's some things that in the fever dream quality of the film, and like the very nature, like I think that the most interesting stuff happens. Like that's just it. It's almost as though the movie is learning from its mistakes, like they shot it in order, because the best stuff happens towards the end, but not the ending itself. When Torgo is sacrificed, and just seeing a guy with a lighter in his sleeve run away from a man in a cloak holding a flaming severed hand and laughing is a bizarre nightmare image. And that combination of just doing what is in the script, trying to figure out what the script means, not knowing what the script means because there is no meaning, and just doing the best you can because it's like, well, we're putting on a show to save the orphanage. That combination of factors, the mixture of enthusiasm and talent level that we see here occasionally like generates things that I would call art. But overall, I think that the movie is really poorly shot and badly colored. Like, there was a review actually in that is mentioned in the Growing Up with Manos book that that compliments the color only, and even then I would take issue with it. It's like, no, this looks awful.
Well, maybe I'll put it another way. Like, even Frank, who at times sounds like he genuinely regrets finding this movie and unleashing it onto the world, admits that it has like an atmosphere, it has a feeling, and I feel like a lot of that comes from its locale. Like, it's so very deeply El Paso. Like, you could just feel the desert sand getting, under your fingers when you watch this movie, the sagebrush and the hot noonday sun when they drive up to Torgo's place. Like, maybe it wasn't colored great, but it's the locale and the setting itself that gives it this weird feeling. Like, why is this rundown ranch painted purple? They didn't make that choice. They just found it that way.
Yeah.
I think if we're going to talk about the atmosphere, we got to talk about the music.
Oh no.
And I think it's time for a little visit to the score corner. Or as some might say, the Scorner.
Yes. Long-awaited return of the Scorner. Well, about this score, and I had the composer's name.
His name is Robert Smith.
There we go. Bob Smith.
Not the one from The Cure.
No. This guy loves everything and is not gothy at all. But Robert Bob Smith, who gave us the score for this movie, inexplicable. It was said to be a total wizard, could play anything. Boy, I would say that whatever talent this man had did not end up on screen, save for one incredible moment. One genuinely incredible moment, and that's something this movie has, where there are very special moments. But we open with the most annoying song I've ever heard, in which the poorest of poor man's Shirley Bassey's warbles something that I cannot understand, no matter how many times I've seen this movie, and it's absolute pain. And the only thing, if that were something in a normal movie, it would be irritating. But so much is going wrong in the movie. Like, the score is perfect for the film because it kind of complements the train wreck by being its own train wreck. And the rest of the score is inexplicably jazzy. And it's almost lounge music.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's such a bizarre choice. And again, an annoying choice in that's all that you hear, save for the magic moment where everything comes together for something that it was not intended to be comedic, but is howl-inducing when you first see it, and unforgettable, and something that you've never seen in a movie before, which is, take our bags, Torgo. And Torgo takes the bags, and there is a cut because a frame is missing, and Torgo just has the bags in his hands, and he's walking, and the Torgo theme starts playing, this jaunty little theme that would be reserved for a cute little goblin character in a Saturday morning cartoon show who causes trouble. This is something that would be suitable for the Great Gazoo, but it's this monstrous character who is deeply sexually depraved and a toady and someone who has, at the very least, participated in the misdeeds of the master just by assisting him, if not also committing horrible actions himself. And yet, there's this lovably goofy Saturday morning moment that occurs. And it's funny because it happens a couple of times. You just get, it's like, oh yeah, there's that Torgo theme again.
The haunting Torgo theme.
It comes through. There's a whole leitmotif system going on.
And that's funny every time. So he generated comic gold. He made something unforgettable, and that is an earworm. That it stays with you. So I think there is a certain pull with it, and that is exclusively the Torgo theme. But the two songs, because I forgot to mention the rockabilly number, which is, again, how many times can I say terrible? Just completely uninspired.
Do you want to do anything? Baby, do a thing with me.
So there's a third song. There's a song that plays over the closing credits as well.
Right, with the same.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
And I did want to mention, just maybe defend the female singer a little bit.
Oh, defend away. She's great. Adam is wrong.
What
about
are you
this.
talking about?
Adam is wrong. This score is
This
fantastic.
is the worst thing that's ever happened.
Incredibly badly recorded. I will give it that.
For sure.
It is really badly recorded in that all of the sort of trebly stuff is all clumped together in this awful way. But I like the music. I like the places it's going. It's completely bizarre for the film. And I think that is 90% of what makes this film so surreal is this lounge jazz music coming out of nowhere. But I think it's really interesting. I think that like doo-doo-doo-doo-doo kind of thing is amazing. I think you're right that it is that the Torgo theme is very jaunty, but it's not also because it's in this strange minor diminished thing going on. So it has an edge to it that you wouldn't expect from a cartoon like you were describing. It's that but more, which I think is kind of perfect for the Torgo character, or at least how we read the Torgo character as this sort of lovable creep horror story. I think that music nails it, but I think a lot of the musical pieces nail it, but are terribly recorded and just sound much more grating than they should. I think also she knocked it out of the park. If you have the story about her recording session there.
So Nikki Mathis is her name, and I don't know, this could fall on either side of your arguments, I would say. So she talks about her recording session with Bob Smith, and she basically says, like, she went to the recording studio from the train station. It was all one take. And the song Magic Circle, which is the first thing we hear her singing with on the credits, she says, like, it was in a register that was a little high for her comfort, but Bob wouldn't change it. It's out of her register.
Yeah.
And that's, you could hear her straining.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But also she says how Smith and the guy who wrote the lyrics to the song, his compadre,
Tim Rice.
yeah,
Russ Huddleston.
They were just sort of giggling and amusing themselves in the corner of the whole recording session. Like they were giving her no help, paying her no attention, and couldn't do anything to help her work it. And she was just like fed off this weird, wild energy and just said, okay, I'll just crank it up to 11 here, which is why the song, like her singing is just so like wild, scatty jazz. It's just all over the place. And she's not Shirley Bassey. Yes. I'm not saying she is like top of the line jazz singer, but she's continued to have a reasonably good jazz career. And, I think she did a good job. I think she did an amazing job considering everything that was thrown at her. And I enjoy it. I wish I could hear a remastered version of the score, but that just doesn't seem to exist.
No, I don't think anyone's ever found those or would want to.
Well, you can find like basically a full soundtrack on Spotify now.
Yeah.
They couldn't completely clip out the film because this is all that you've got, but it's there if you want to enjoy it on your own.
It still sounds terrible there. Like it's just bad recording. And then you have the dialogue coming in, and the dialogue does not always come in at the right moments for where you'd want it to in terms of listening to the song. Like in that first song when she's singing, like the Diane, the mom's first line comes in right in the middle of a line. It's so clashy when you're trying to listen to it. It's unfortunate.
Now just 10 miles up this road. We're almost there, Debbie. Just a few minutes more.
But I do like the music. Also, I should say, in terms of the composer himself, Bob Smith, eventually he kept on making music. He was a student when the film was being made. He went on to keep working at the University of Texas, El Paso for a few years, put on a few more shows with people, like musical type things, and did a lot of LSD, like everybody seemed to be doing.
Everyone should.
And then eventually...
Allegedly.
And then eventually did a lot of LSD one time in the desert and dreamed that Jesus came down to him in a spacecraft and told him to give it all up. And so he did.
Yes.
Sold his piano and used the proceeds to go around and spread the word of the Lord.
Now, let me tell you how much I admired Jesus for what he did.
Okay, so that's the music. Obviously a contentious thing on this podcast, but Adam's wrong. We're going to move on.
You say that. You say that.
Is there anything else about the movie that we'd like to shout out or tisk before we move on?
I just want to kind of point out some of the visuals that weren't noticeable until the remaster came out. For instance, it wasn't really noticeable before that all the wives and the master are wearing really thick white pancake makeup, which, I just figured was just, bad film before at night. Because, of course, I've also, legendarily, this show shoots night for night because it was just easier to get everybody after their day jobs. So that's why you have so many moths flying around in the camera. So that is like a hint, like, oh, they're supposed to be in a different state from the living. And this is a visual cue for that. The other thing that just haunts my dreams now, Torgo sleeps on a pile of dirt.
Yeah, that's a great visual. That is one of a handful of moments where, again, you just ask why. Because Torgo sleeping on a pile of dirt, and I say this without irony or one drip of sarcasm, could be a painting, and you could hang it in the Louvre. There's greatness within it, and that's why it's so compelling.
Well, that same shot is when so one of the things I like about this movie is there wasn't a lot of respect or awe for the director, so a lot of the crew would just like do things to mess around with him. For instance, in this shot, sticking a beer bottle in there to see if the director would actually notice. He didn't.
I would say that I love the master's costume. I love the two big hands on the two big red hands. He really looks like a comic book character in the best possible way, like in the way that the comic book characters of the classic era are pop art. Like, he really looks great. And I think that this is a fascinating experience, whether you're watching it as an MST3K episode or you're watching it unmisted. I think that this is a really interesting experience to watch it when you see this kind of thing done more successfully. The two movies I brought up in our document, I don't think either of you have seen them, but Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes and Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, both from the 1970s. So post Manos. But one, there's an idea behind both movies, and there's something genuinely more frightening about their depiction of the monsters that lie out there in the desert, in both cases. And it's really interesting to see films that have so much craft and so much thought put into them, and then see a movie where the main creative force, the person behind the story, just didn't care and happens to call upon these same tropes almost accidentally, almost as if there's this pre-existing story that others are going to tap into that he inadvertently reached. And that is a really bizarre, like, it's weird to see this as a precursor to more successful movies, only, again, clumsy and poorly made.
So what do you think the dirt pile was meant to suggest?
There's two ways you can read it, I think. Well, there's more than two ways you can read it, but the two ways that I read it, and I go back and forth on this, because again, we can't take the movie literally, because there's so much the movie is trying to show us and kind of failing to show us. I think what they're trying to show is that Torgo sleeps in his own filth. But it really does look like he's gathered a nice patch of dirt for himself, and he's just this friendly little critter who likes to sleep in the dirt, and that just makes him weirdly lovable.
To be clear, this is inside like an otherwise mostly normal bedroom.
The only thing that would make the scene better is if Torgo were sleeping next to a bed.
So let's talk a little bit about the making of. Obviously, for the full details, you're going to want to check out any of the number of articles that have been written about it, but especially Jackie's book.
In stores now.
In Amazon now, anyway.
That's a store.
It is technically a store. So basically, Hal Warren grew up wanting to be in showbiz. Like a lot of people in his generation, he enlisted during World War II, and afterwards he organized entertainment reviews throughout the army. He had a few random showbiz connections, but nothing really seemed to stick. His true talent, it turned out, was in sales. So I guess he didn't need to watch Hired. He had a silver tongue, and he was able to seal the deal with anyone he talked to. But he still dreamed of making it in showbiz. And there's a weird story about how he would make films with his kids
Yeah.
at Christmas, like the night before, and make them all come down the stairs and do multiple takes of it, which he never did for this movie.
No, heaven forbid.
But his kids had to come down and look in awe and wonder and not actually get to open the presents until the next morning. Amazing. Anyway, he moved to El Paso in 1965, started working with the Festival Theater, which is where he met up with a lot of the cast in the movie. He was able to talk all of his castmates into being in this film that he was going to make. And he really wasn't just trying to make a movie. As I suggested earlier, he was hoping this would be the launching pad for a future career, and also to make El Paso kind of a destination, a place where would have a film scene and people would come and want to do it. But he wanted to make the first film, the film that would raise a bit of awareness and raise a bit of money to make the second film and to get the ball rolling. So basically, he promised everyone percentages of the profit, which at some point, the cast added up and realized that he had promised several 100% of what the movie actually could possibly deliver. And of course, he made a really terrible movie because he just wanted the movie to be done so that he could make the next one.
Now, Chris, I don't know if you're describing Manos or my own final year short film.
Afterwards, people really were wary for giving him any money to make his second film.
Should we say the name of the title that he was thinking for his second film?
Yeah, it was going to be called Wild Desert Bikers.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting.
And very familiar for season 2. Like, it would have fit in right in with Side Hackers and nonsense like that.
And Wild Rebels.
And Wild Rebels and Hellcats is the other one. Yeah. We'll do that trilogy at some point. Eventually, after that, he moves to Arizona, starts working in real estate. He writes a book about salescraft called Computerized Salesmanship, The New Last Frontier. Quoting Jackie, here he summarized his persuasive technique as, quote, programming your prospective customer to his particular needs and wants by transfer of wants and ideas, your brain, to another, his brain, in such a way that you both extract the same meaning from them.
That sounds like Scientology.
It sounds
he still
awful.
has it. He still has it as a writer, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So that is our director. The film, I guess most people probably know about this. It was shot in all these really, this terrible camera that could only do very short shots. Mm-hmm. There's no sound being taken fabulously. They all traveled, overdubbed that all in later. Diane, the mom, couldn't be bothered when she found out that she'd have to pay for her own way to get there. She'd spent enough time and energy on this stink bomb, so she didn't go out. So all the women's voices were dubbed by his wife's younger sister, Marcia Friedman, who I guess had been trained in opera. She, I think, does a pretty great job doing several different women's voices. It's much harder to do a young girl's voice.
Yeah, and she struggles a bit with Debbie.
She definitely struggles with Debbie, but she doesn't really struggle with all the rest of it. I didn't even quite realize that these were different women.
Yeah, the wives are pretty distinctive.
It explains why the wives arguing scenes, especially if you watch it unmisted, it's just a loop of everybody saying the same things. Mm-hmm. Like the one of them says, as the oldest wife, I have say in this, something like that, and just says it every time they cut to the women squabbling.
Child will grow up to be a woman, and as the oldest of the wives, I demand that she live. The child will grow up to be a woman, and as the oldest of the wives, I demand that she live.
But, she does a good job. The premiere was straight out of the Ed Wood biopic.
Yeah.
He got the ritziest theater in town, got everybody there, had fake autograph hounds outside the door, rented a limo and had it going around the block to bring everybody in. It was all 9 yards.
Oh, we should be clarified. One limo for everybody. So the limo would drop people off, go around and pick up the next batch from an alley, and then drive them in, drop them off, and get the next batch.
It's the only way to do it. Definitely going to save money that way. Mm-hmm. And then the movie started and everybody was very excited. And then the movie started and everybody stopped being very excited as that jazz music started and that long driving sequence at the opening kept going on.
It dares you to believe that it'll stop.
Apparently, that was originally where the credits were supposed to go. That's why there's so much of that. And they'd already done the soundtrack, and apparently they couldn't re-edit around that, or wouldn't. So it just had nothing instead when they decided to put all the credits at the end. Oh, well. But yeah, they all quickly realized sitting there that it was just going to be a disaster. And many of them, they didn't quite sort of slink out, but they definitely avoided people on the exit, all the cast and crew. The after party was a bit muted.
Yeah, it would be. Despite, obviously, some rager characters who'd be participating.
So that was sort of the thing. Is there anything else from the story that you want to bring attention to?
Well, again, this is mostly coming from Jackie Naaman Jones's book. What I really appreciated was the perspective of the fact that so Hal's a horn dog, and basically this whole movie was mostly just an excuse to get some pretty ladies to bare some skin. But it didn't work out because this isn't Hollywood. And so he didn't have that power over these women. And he tried. And there's just all this series of stories where he tries to push women past their comfort zones, and they just say no. And they can push back. Like, it's not because these are a bunch of like strong pre-Me Too feminists. They had their families around. And so, Chris, you've already talked about how like he tried to get Diane Marie to take her top off, but her mom was just outside the door. She brought her with her. And the models, they had been very strongly protected by the matron of the modeling agency, whose name I am missing right now. And they just outright refused when they realized that they were just going to be wearing diaphanous gowns and little else. They basically threatened to walk off the set. And so we should say that Tom Naaman's wife, who's also named Jackie, was the seamstress who made the amazing Manos cowl, but she was also in charge of the diaphanous gowns. And she tried at the very end to add like a jock strap, which is the red,
the big red thing. You can see it more clearly in the remastered version. But there's a red sash that goes down like a really long loincloth under the diaphanous taffeta or whatever it is.
They look like ambassadors from a third season Star Trek episode.
But I mean, that wasn't enough for the models, and they deliberately just like, we're gonna wear like the granny-ish underwear we can just to screw it to Hal. And there's nothing he could do about it. He couldn't find other people. He couldn't go and just find a bunch of like nubile young starlets who were hoping to break it. Like, he just had to go with what was there.
He couldn't not pay them either.
Yeah.
He wasn't paying them in the first place.
And that's just it. Like, Hal is not a Hollywood bigwig, so they had nothing to lose. Absolutely nothing to lose by refusing his idea.
I've been thinking a lot because we just did Bride of the Monster, which is the previous episode. And I never really sort of thought about this movie as much in terms of Ed Wood as I have getting ready for this podcast, even though there are some obvious parallels, especially in terms of like, there's one person whose drive it is to really make this movie. And then there's just a lot of weirdos, like the outcasts of society for the most part, coming around and saying, yeah, I'll pitch in, I'll do a thing. And it should be this lovely thing. But it turns out that Warren is no Wood.
No.
And part of that is that, like, Ed Wood would never. Well, maybe he would in the later years. But I think those women knew what they were getting into. Like, Ed Wood would never spring it on somebody that now you're supposed to take your top off.
I mean, he might do it to Bella.
You know, I was thinking about that in the Ed Wood film. In the biopic, he does it to Bella in terms of get in the lake and pretend to be, wrestling with us. But in the movie, that's the stunt double.
Yeah.
So he doesn't actually do that to Bella. I don't know. I think part of it is that Hal is trying to do one over on these women, and Ed didn't seem to do that.
And well, that's because there's a big difference between who those people are. And that's because old Hal is a salesman, often derisively referred to as that fertilizer salesman from El Paso. And Ed Wood is an artist.
Exactly.
And it was also the case that like the cast and crew just didn't have that kind of built-in awe that I feel like the Hollywood system places on the director, especially during the studio system times. And there's just a lot of stories from Jackie's book about like the lack of kind of like they made fun of him a lot. So you can actually see like a clapboard at some point where it says the director's name is Klutz, and most of the crew were his poker buddies, so they didn't really feel any need to like allow him to pull rank. And very early on, they had nicknamed the movie "Mangoes the Cans of Fruit."
I love that. I absolutely adore that.
So it sounds like I hope, if nothing else, that it sounds like it was somewhat fun. The process, you know.
I have a feeling that you read Jackie's book and it's as though she's describing, even though it's her family and a bunch of adults, she's almost describing summer camp. She's in this weird acting camp, and it definitely feels like that. And so that atmosphere is kind of there, and is kind of attractive in the movie.
Yeah, and I think there are plenty of people who are giving a lot. I mean,
oh yeah.
Tom in particular, but there are a lot of people who are invested in this as far as they can be, as far as it makes sense to go. But they're not the ones making the decisions. There are tales of the other, like the camera people, trying to put in interesting artsy shots and being told by Hal, no, we've got to only do what we do. We can't, like, there, not only is it sort of, there isn't any budget, there isn't enough film is very expensive, don't waste it on those shots, but just a sense of like, it felt like when the cameras were rolling, you get the sense that he was just in this like work mode where everything had to be boom, boom, boom. And I don't know, that's just not the sense I get from Ed Wood. That's not a healthy mode to be in. That's not the sense I get from Roger Corman either.
Yeah.
Like, even though you are like, we got to make this happen and we're not going to do another take, there's still a sense of play and flexibility on set.
Oh yeah, and that's just it. That goes back to what I was saying. Like, Hal is a salesman through and through, and Corman and Ed Wood is like, Corman might be concerned about the dollar, but he's still an artist at heart.
Is this a 60s movie through and through?
Yes.
What's the most 60s thing about Manos, the Hands of Fate?
The fashion of Torgo.
The fashion, the women's hair.
Oh yeah,
is I think the thing.
I love Diane Marie's dress with the little blue flowers on it. It's also a nice little touch.
My grandmother had that as wallpaper.
Where?
In the bathroom.
I guess what really strikes me is how this feels like it's a bit set in the 50s, because of course it's a horror movie, but it's a tame horror movie, and because of the the pushback from the women, it's not the kind of skin film that I think Hal was hoping it would be, that were becoming more popular in the 60s at this time. But at the same time, like, what always was compelling about this movie is it seems to have anticipated a lot of stuff that happened near the end of the decade. In fact, just 1 year later in some cases. So a lot of people are trying to uncover where Hal got this idea of the sex cult, for lack of a better term. It seems like he was very fascinated with Freemasons. But Freemasons weren't a sex cult. They had weird rituals, but they were like, the very Protestant Freemasons guild. But listen to one podcaster suggest that he was drawing from Anton LaVey, who was a famous Satanist of the 60s, who got a lot of TV and newspaper appearances. Like, people love this idea of a Satanist.
I thought you were going to say he got a lot of tang, which he also got.
Who had a very similar look to the Master, I have to say, if you look at pictures. And also had a lot of groupies, acolytes, whatever you want to call them, disciples. That might have been an idea. So it might be drawing from that, but it's also anticipating kind of like the Manson cult. And I think I mentioned this before. Like, there's a very like Spawn Ranch feel about this whole thing. Like, this ranch is filthy. And like everything I read about the Manson family is they're just like caked in filth. Like, they were disgusting. That was one of my favorite moments in the riffing is occasionally when Joel breaks, and then he has a moment where it's a shot of Debbie on the couch, and he's just like, man, that poor kid, because the couch is so filthy.
Yeah.
So it's, and the darker aspects of the 60s, like, this is very tame, but at the same time, like, that thing that was happening in this time where there was a sexual revolution, and it seemed to mostly just be for like gross men to fulfill this idea of having like a harem. which is happening in the Summer of Love. Like, basically, all these gurus were just walking around Haight-Ashbury, just trying to pick up like groups of women to follow them around like their own personal harems. That's what Manson was trying to do. And this seems to have anticipated that in a strange way. And even though, of course, it's very like unsexy sex cult, as Adam has pointed out, but I just think it's very interesting that it seems to have picked up on what was kind of in the air and hadn't even really broke yet.
Well, that's just it. It's almost as if there's something guiding people to write stories that's just downright, mythical or godlike in quality, as strange as that might sound, because there is something that's being captured here that has yet to occur, like you said. And I think it's because there was a rise in the 60s of alternative spirituality, we'll say, and that's very much this is a reaction to it. But like I said, as with everything in this movie, it's just not thought through. It's like, this is another color we can paint with. And I think that when you paint so broadly, so to speak, you end up capturing all like so many things that the film almost becomes like a kind of Rorschach ink blot, and you can see so much because everything is so vaguely defined that it immediately calls to mind other things that you know about.
I think we've made this point before, long ago, when I was still on the show more regularly. Like, one of the things that we really like about watching these movies that are bad is that they seem to capture something about the zeitgeist they came from a little bit more accurately than the good movies from that time. Like, it's almost like you're seeing a more honest version of how things were in a strange way.
That's absolutely right.
I don't know what this says about where the 60s went. And weirdly enough, I was actually kind of surprised that this wasn't like the Los Angeles desert. It's the El Paso desert, because I swear to God, they're just going to walk into another frame and their like squeaky will be from the Manson cult.
No, the Mansons weren't the only cult.
They're the most
famous,
the most
and the
famous.
one that we remember the most. But there were lots of people in that part of the 60s. I mean, maybe especially a few years later, who were exploring the possibilities of like different sexual arrangements and having communes and so forth.
Yeah, I was just gonna say communes too.
Yeah. And that may also be part of where this is coming from. And like, especially in sort of out of the way corners of the world like El Paso, you can sort of imagine that maybe they'd be hearing things and it would catch their imagination, or maybe just they were trying it out. I don't know. I mean, especially around these artists who are not necessarily being part of the mainstream. I don't know. And Jackie doesn't really talk about that aspect of it. Many of the people involved are on their third or fourth wife.
Yeah.
I mean, Hal is on his third wife right at this point and is clearly still lusting after other people. There are all sorts of men involved in the making of the film who are serial womanizers. And, that kind of power fantasy is there, but it's also sort of fading away from them in a sense as women become more liberated. And this idea that, the master's power is failing seems to be tapping into that. But again, it is really vague. And you don't have a sense of like, what exactly is the master's power failing mean? He's still pretty able to kill Torgo and then trap the new people who are coming by. Like, what's that all about? And you're right, Adam, it doesn't say that. Like, it doesn't go into detail. So you can map anything you want onto that.
Now, you mentioned that, Chris, I believe you referred to the Manson family as the cult that you remember. And would that in turn make them a cult favorite?
Oh,
I'm watching a lot of Rocky and Bullwinkle lately, and I've been enjoying puns.
All right. Well, moving on. Now, although we talked about Manos being the film of the 60s, it got popular in the 90s. Was Manos the film of the 90s? It's more popular now than it's ever been. Is it the film of today?
Is it the chicken of tomorrow?
What's up with that? Why did this film resonate so strongly with everybody?
Well, I mean, I do think that Manos would be improved if you replace the score with Seinfeldian bass riffs.
Oh, God, no. I mean, there have been quite a lot of adaptations of Manos. Too many to list, frankly. Though we have a list of, I don't even think the list we have here is complete.
No, but there's been stage plays, puppet shows, you have rock operas, you have burlesque shows, you have iPhone games, you have even other movies, prequels and sequels, and squeakquels.
I want the squeakquel, which is all about
Yeah.
the nice rat that also lives on Torgo's pile of dirt.
Well, he's the one actually pulling on Torgo's hair, which makes his knees move.
So there's something very generative about this movie. Like, it encourages other amateur creatives to be creative, you know?
Does it?
I mean, that's true, and I think a lot of the productions are leaning into that. This feels possible, and yet tantalizingly other. It's a film that's so strange, and yet it seems like it is so easy to make. Like it was made by nobody's, in a sense. It is the feeling that you get, and yet I don't think any of them capture it perfectly. I saw Manos, the stage play. It was put on in Portland in the mid 2000s. And it was cute. It was fun. It was perfectly charming. But it was a haha. Like it was a let's put this on stage. Let's sort of reinterpret moments from the film in silly ways. I think in the second later production, which I didn't see, they had replaced Debbie with a doll, but had Jackie backstage doing the voice.
Oh my god!
Which is a weird tribute to like her voice getting replaced in the original film, and like it's a brilliant idea. It was full of little jokes like that, and it was a very entertaining hour. It wasn't, groundbreaking or anything. It didn't capture the majesty of Manos.
No.
Have any of you seen anything or dealt with anything else on this list?
No, not really. I was worried about having that like, ooh, kind of like, I see what you're doing, but it's not working. So I never really looked into it.
The only other thing that I've interacted with here is the video game version of it.
Is it any good?
I've watched a playthrough of it.
That's the better idea. I mean, you might like it more than I did because it's like a nasty platformer that is unfair, but it is full of little Easter eggs about I played the director's version, which came out a bit later than the original iPhone version, but either way, it's filled with little Easter eggs about other MST3K related properties, like you get attacked by eye creatures and killer leeches, and there's a whole Plan 9 stage and so forth. And like, yeah, it's not a very clever or smart game. It's not a very fun or fair game. It's probably better to watch a Let's Play than to try to play it yourself, but it's real cheap if you want to buy it on Steam. So if you like unforgiving SNES era type platforms, you could go for it. I don't know. I threw down my controller in disgust and loaded up a Let's Play to watch the ending.
I've heard good things about The Hands of Felt, which is the puppet version, but I have not yet checked it out.
I followed its development on Facebook, I think, just because I remember routinely seeing pictures of the puppets. And again, I thought, oh, that's cute. I think that the problem, and this goes back to why this is so, shall we say, zeitgeisty in the 90s in the first place, is that it's not that people fell in love with Manos. It's that people fell in love with the Oreo that is the MST3K episode, Manos, The Hands of Fate. And ironically, looking at the 60s, is very 90s.
Yes, that's true.
And this was this was tapping into something that had not been completely mined, had not been completely played out. I mean, a very Brady sequel had yet to ruin everything. So this was fresh and interesting, and it was all the better by the fact that you do have something that is so alarmingly 60s and would make you think, oh, this was inspired by the Mansons, and then you see the copyright date and go, wait, that doesn't make any sense. But it so captures the time. And you have these 90s wise guys who would have been kids in the 60s and thus knowledgeable of the time, really making hay out of it knowledgeably. And so I think that's what makes it. But with all of these recreations and tributes in sequels and prequels, is that the shadow of MST3K and the fact that MST3K is the first lens you view this through sort of spoils it, in that like Manos is always a joke, Manos is always defanged, and if you really wanted to, it's like, oh, I want to remake Manos, or I want to continue Manos in some way. That's not an impossible task. And I think that by digging deep into what you're describing, with the joke about Debbie, and we're really thinking with the doll and everything, and it's a very good joke. But by thinking about it, it's like, well, how can we extrapolate jokes out of this thing? Is again a compliment to the MST3K episode. And that's all that is. Whereas no one is really trying to capture Manos. They're just kind of capturing the feeling you get from Manos, which is this episode. No one really saw it on its own terms.
I think that is how the people making Manos Returns, the sequel that came out a few years ago, were describing it, or at least that's how Jackie was framing it when they were fundraising for it, that it was trying to do the same thing but go in deeper directions with the story and use modern technology to be able to make a better film. From what clips I've seen and the way people are talking about it, I don't know how successful it was. I haven't watched the whole thing yet, so I can't really say, but it's not looking super exciting to me based on what I've seen.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think actually that's one of the interesting things about this phenomenon is that Jackie and some of the other cast members are so available. Like, Jackie is willing to work with any friendly person on anything Manos related, and is able to bring her father in, who's, still alive in his 80s now, I believe, but and potentially bring in other cast members from the original thing. But there's just like that tremendous cachet of not only can you make something in tribute of and inspired by this film and this episode that you loved, but also you can have the actual cast members be part of it. Like, what other thing can you do that with? You can't do that with an Ed Wood film.
No, sadly,
there's I don't know if anybody's left.
Well, one of the other interesting things I think is that because of I think you're right that you can't really separate this movie from where it came from, which is MST3K. But because it has created such a reputation for Manos, there is now a whole generation of YouTubers that their first encounter with Manos is not through Mystery Science Theater 3000, because now, they're trying to make a reputation for themselves as snarky, bad movie people. They go through a list, and what's at the very bottom all the time of like one of the worst movies ever made? Manos. So they watch it without any kind of understanding of what came out of this. And so I think part of my idea of like, let's do the defense of Manos, because I was watching these and they're just like, I felt the need to defend it because they're just like, oh, like literally the whole joke is like, they just show like a bit of Manos and be like, I didn't edit any of this.
Yes. Well, that's just it, with very few exceptions. And I think we can all agree. Two things. One, YouTube film commentary, especially comedic YouTube film commentary, is atrocious.
Is the pits.
Yeah. And honestly, and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but this won't be cut from the podcast. I promise. Which is that a lot of things that have been inspired by MST3K are terrible because they don't understand. They know the words, but not the music. It's that simple. Because as Joel put it so beautifully, it's the host body. Honestly, it's SNL and the movie is the host, or the Muppet Show and the movie is the host, and the bizarre thing that most bad movie content farmers on the internet do is they just have one mode of comedy, whereas MST3K at its best is playing with a lot of different styles in its humor. You have a lot of different flavor by the fact that you have all these writers with different backgrounds, some of whom were very established in the comedy world, like say a comic like TV's Frank, or even someone who'd been on Letterman like Joel had and SNL. And then you had people who were completely complete outsiders, but had talent, had a sharp comedic voice and comedic sensibilities, and you brought all of that together, and they different educations, different backgrounds. You have this beautiful gumbo of jokes, and then you have people who are raised more by the reputation of MST3K than MST3K. MST3K takes down the movie, and that's not what the show does at its best. And to imitate that, which is to say to do it, but to do a diluted version of what is already a diluted version of the show,
Mm-hmm.
is to just show up already stinking.
Yeah, they're pretty smelly.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that Manos is at the bottom of the list. Has Manos replaced Plan 9 as the worst movie ever made in the popular imagination? You know, we all may be able to think of worse movies than either of them, but in the popular imagination, is this the official worst movie ever made now?
That's funny to think about because Plan 9 was a 50s movie that became really big in the 80s.
Mhm.
So it's almost as if there was like a kind of generational like update going on. And then, of course, we get the 2000s and there's no such thing. And then irony just changes. And you can't, well, I mean, the internet, there's no monoculture anymore, right? So there's just no way to really like engage with anything on that level because everyone's just like, I hate it, but other people love it. Like it becomes what is good and what is bad just kind of explodes, I think, once like internet culture just kind of takes over the world.
Yeah, but there has been another sort
There's
of
The Room.
contender. There's The Room.
And those people are wrong, and they need to go to jail.
I haven't seen The Room. I don't know.
Well, I will say this: The Room's a worse movie than Manos and Plan 9 from Outer Space, but only in the sense that there's nothing to love about it. It's a hate-filled movie, and it's not as entertaining as people say it is. That's my hot take.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Yeah, like Tommy Wiseau as a performer is funny and awkward, but that's just such a hateful movie.
Like if I watched it, it's just like
fever dream,
dripping with misogyny. It's really hard to watch.
Yeah, it's deeply unpleasant. Whereas Plan 9 is made with love, and Manos inadvertently is Lynchian. Like it honestly is. As much as the term Lynchian is abused, I honestly think you could say it's like there's David Lynch aspects.
Wait, the awkward pauses, the way the camera just stays on people just a little bit too long, and how everyone's a bit stilted. Yeah.
Yeah. The homemade quality to everything, and the very fact that there's the prominent featuring of a lodge. It just, it's all very Lynchian. But also, I have to ask, would you say that this is in the popular imagination or strictly among film nerds? Because definitely among film nerds, it's like, oh, Manos is certainly famous. Manos is famous from cult series Mystery Science Theater 3000. But to the average person, isn't Plan 9 still the worst movie? Like, and to B-movie fans, it's like Manos is there, and The Room is there, and Troll 2 are there as well.
Well, the thing that people talk about as the way you can tell is because in the 90s on Seinfeld, they talked about Plan 9 from Outer Space as being the worst movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the 2000s, How I Met Your Mother talks about Manos: The Hands of Fate as being the worst movie. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's been a few other references to Manos scattered throughout things like that since then. I don't know. I get the sense that Manos has not fully taken the crown of the worst movie.
No.
The way that Plan 9 was unquestionably the worst movie for a good while until Manos came up. But, I think definitely for some people, and again, these are for people for whom this is a question of interest, right? Obviously, your average Joe has never seen a movie like Manos. And I in many ways, I think that's actually why the movie got big. I think Dr. Forrester really lays it out in the introduction. That this is not like other movies.
No, it's not.
You haven't seen a movie like this before. At least most people haven't.
Yeah.
And even if you've seen Plan 9, this isn't like that.
No, this doesn't prepare. Or sorry, Plan 9 does not prepare you for Manos.
If you've seen a Coleman Francis movie, you might be prepared for this. Red Zone Cuba maybe prepares you a little bit, even though it's a completely different kind of movie and a different kind of bad. But you just weren't ready for it. And MST3K made it so watchable. I mean, I know a lot of people who say the first time through it, it took them several goes to get through it or so forth.
Those people are weak.
Yeah, fair enough. But they're, they haven't watched maybe a tremendous amount of MST3K, or they just weren't ready for it. But this is as gentle an introduction to this weird film as you can get. And it's delightful and as hand-holdy and as pleasant as you can imagine. And they did such a service to this movie.
Oh, it's a love letter to Manos.
As weird and odd as this movie is, I feel like it does have a kind of boozy spiritual cousin with Starfighters in that.
Starfighters.
Starfighters.
It's in the 60s.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense as a film.
Right.
It's kind of red.
Okay, you listen to me.
There's like really long, awkward moments where nothing is happening except for like planes refueling.
Yeah, okay.
And Torgo himself is refueled.
Sure. Okay, all right, I see.
And I guess going back to the real question, what is the worst movie? And it's like as we've come to again on this podcast, a movie that is truly bad is a movie without charm. Plan 9 has charm, though it's not the best of Ed Wood's movies, and the Ed Wood library has absolute gems in them. This, in its own way, is a gem of a movie simply because you'll never see anything like it, and there are things that do work in the movie, but again, they all seem like accidents, with the exception of maybe that cloak, which is so rad.
Yeah, I think this is like when you say the worst movie, it's a real misnomer because we can all think of movies that made us angry or bored or just like we
Monster Go-Go.
That's a brilliant movie. What are you talking
I
about?
have to say, even in the time, even in season 4 era, when I was first getting online and hearing discourse about this, I was like, no, Monster Go-Go was a worse movie than Manos. Manos is a great, weird movie in ways that Monster Go-Go can only dream of being.
Monster Go-Go has a great score, a terrific monster who goes a go-go.
There's just what I think the difference, and I forget the name. He used to be on AV Club, and so I apologize for people but he also went through bad movies, and he had a difference between failure and fiasco
and secret success. You're talking about Nathan Rabin.
That's him.
Yeah,
yes,
that's so Rabin.
And Manos is a fiasco, and that's what makes
it a secret success.
And that's what makes it interesting to watch. Like, I think of bad movies, like that, like turn my stomach, are failures. I just never want to even think about them again.
Yeah, and I have a feeling I speak for the people on this one, but I think we should go one by one on this and what truly is, the most reprehensible movie you've seen.
Armageddon.
Oh, interesting choice. Now, Armageddon has a terrific power ballad by Aerosmith that I kind of love, possibly because it was the first slow dance. And I literally had to pick up my date because she was 5 feet tall. So there's that. I would say that
we should mention that Adam's about 6'10".
Yes, that's why they call me White Shack. But the most reprehensible movie to ever be made is the Jason Reitman, Melissa McCarthy comedy Identity Thief, for the laugh-free hour and a half that it gives you in its utter misery.
All right, what's yours, Chris?
Better not be Monster Go-Go.
Of the Misted movies, I am starting to think that Wild World of Bad Women is the one.
Yeah.
But honestly, I don't know. Every bad movie is bad in a different way, and I don't feel like I have a good answer for this. I do want to know, Beth, is Manos: The Hands of Fate better than The Martian?
I was going to say, am I not doing the right callback here? The Martian wasn't terrible. It was just dull, and
you're avoiding the answer. Is it better than The Martian or not?
Manos?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's better than The Martian. It has been decided 100 episodes in. Manos is better than The Martian.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 little tidbits about today's episode, Manos: The Hands of Fate. Go Adam, go!
Let's start with the short. If you check out the IMDb page for Hired, you'll find that someone has added this fun bit of trivia. The short was broken up into 2 films, mostly for the purpose of letting people get some coffee or tea with cookies in the break room. Also, time to change the 8mm film.
Which once again shows that you can't trust everything on the IMDb. Hired is 19 minutes long, not exactly a Lawrence of Arabia type epic requiring an intermission. The break happens awkwardly in the middle of a scene, and of course, other copies of the film, like you'll find in the Prelinger archive, have the film without interruption. Oh, and the little part 2 is clearly from the 90s and doesn't, sort of vibrate like the film underneath it. I rest my case.
Okay, so back to Manos. As the 2015 Playboy article reveals, though Hal Warren's filmmaking ambitions were somewhat quashed by his movie's poor reception, he kept many mementos from the film's shoot. His daughter-in-law, Amy Warren, recalls walking into the household for the first time, seeing the 4-by-5-foot painting of the master hung over the couch. I thought these people were freaking nuts, she recalls.
The iron hand that pokes out of the master's cauldron of fire transforms Torgo's hand into a gruesome tiki torch with the merest touch. But this was not the first human hand it had burned. Shortly after Tom Neiman finished welding the piece, he warned young Jackie, "Don't touch that, it's hot." As she writes, "I stuck my thumb out to test it and came away screaming bloody murder. It was the worst blister of my life."
The two women at the end of the film, who stumble upon Michael as substitute Torgo, were played by secretaries of local businessmen. Lelanie Hansard worked for Judge Colbert Caldwell, who loaned his ranch for the Manos shoot. The other woman is credited as Jay Hall, but that's the name of the guy she worked for. Presumably, Hal didn't bother to look up her name in his rush to make the credits.
Fans get a lot of traction over Tom Servo's revelation that Hal P. Warren was a fertilizer salesman. Because, get it? Only someone who literally works with would make such a terrible movie. But, in fact, he was a salesman for chemical fertilizer, a product manufactured artificially out of minerals or synthetic chemicals. Inorganic fertilizers were all the rage in the 20th century because they increase crop yields dramatically. But they can also upset an entire ecosystem by creating a toxic buildup of chemicals, and their development requires far more fossil fuel-intensive extraction and manufacturing processes. So try to tie that concept to the film if you can.
According to Jackie's book, Torgo's outsized legs were built by Tom Neiman using fencing wire that he bent and soldered into shape and then stuffed with car seat upholstery foam. The 5'5" Reynolds wore the contraptions over the much taller Neiman's coveralls, which were roomy enough for the braces.
At the beginning of the episode, when the bots still have the protocols to cherish everything Joel says or does, Tom says,
Yes, Roger
Joel.
Penrose on his best day isn't half as brilliant or as charming as you, I might add.
Roger Penrose is a British mathematician, physicist, and philosopher who won a Nobel Prize last year for his work on black holes, and his work on mathematical tiling inspired the art of M.C. Escher. But, I decided to start making a podcast with these friends about Joel's puppet show, so yeah, I guess Tom has a point.
When they first meet Torgo, Margaret and Michael have only one thing on their minds.
We only want to know where Valley Lodge is.
Which way do we go?
Scranton, Pennsylvania is right near the Pocono Mountains, a popular resort area in the region, and there is a Valley Lodge there, although it's the beautiful Mount Airy Lodge that ran all the commercials in the 80s.
When we first see the painting of the master and his pooch, Tom says,
"It's a Frank Frazetta of Frank Zappa."
Now, we talked about the love it or hate it music of Frank Zappa in our episode on Village of the Giants. And you may remember the fantasy and sci-fi artwork of Frank Frazetta from our episode on Master Ninja 2, in which Tom wants his cool van to be painted a la Frazetta. So, I guess we've covered this one already. Cool.
Torgo apologizes, kinda, for trying to touch Margaret inappropriately, and Crow has a riff.
Forgive me, madam.
Oh, it's Senator Packwood.
Bob Packwood was a Republican senator from Oregon for decades until the early 90s, when 19 women came forward with allegations of sexual abuse. Weirdly, Packwood had kept a diary of his activities, which was eventually subpoenaed, because what did he think would happen with it? He was ousted from the Senate, but don't worry, he became a powerful lobbyist and did just fine.
As the brides fight, Tom quips,
This isn't Lysistrata. I like it, but it isn't Lysistrata.
Lysistrata is an ancient Greek comedy about some women who want to end the Peloponnesian War. They decide to unionize and withhold sex from men until the war ends. It's pretty fun. You should check it out. There's a lot of dongs in it.
And finally, in real life, the Doberman who played the master's satanic hell beast was the Neiman's dog, who was sweet and stupid and wanted to be everyone's friend. The poodle who played Peppy was Hal Warren's dog, who was badly behaved and who bit Hal's infant son on the lip, leaving a scar. The Warrens decided to put Peppy down not long after that incident, to which we say, boo.
Boo. Put it in a different house. But that time! I like the reveal that neither of them bothered to train their animals at all.
Well, they weren't meant to be film animals, certainly.
No, but just like no obedience training, nothing. But just one of them was a real sweetheart and the other one was a jerk.
It was also super popular to just put your animals down, like back in the day. Like some people would do it while they were going on vacation.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
awful. Awful.
That's why you have to clone your pet like Barbara Streisand did.
Many times. Make an army.
Oh man.
Beth, it seemed quite sad to miss out on Hired Part 1, but I'm glad you're here to talk about Hired Part 2 with us.
Oh, are you?
Well, you seem to think that it offered some good advice for us to all learn from.
I thought it was interesting that it was suggesting that you should be more nurturing to your staff. Like it wouldn't say that. It's a very like, this is a man's world and we do things a certain way. But basically what our lead sales guy realizes is that he can't just follow this kind of like heroic Ubermensch kind of idea about salesmanship, where it's just like, if you're talented and good, you'll just figure this out for yourself. That you actually have to like build and develop and be a positive enforcer and work on their strengths and not just like berate them. And it's kind of funny because I just feel like, just from a child rearing perspective, like it seemed like they were nicer to salespeople than they were to their own children, which were very much still like very much like Spock, don't hug your kid too much or you'll turn them into schizophrenics,
Hey, that's true.
So how are your children's sales numbers doing?
Well, they sell a lot to me, but nobody else really. There's a lot of like bathtub water that I'm told is the most delicious thing ever.
Ugh.
What?
So your kids are trying to kill you, that's what you're saying.
No, it's because they have cups and they're just like, they pretend they're at a bar and that they're giving you something to drink, but all they have is...
Stop showing your kids Roadhouse.
Oh, man. In the words of Ernest P. Worrell,
Not like a bar, like a soft serve bar,
Like a what? Like an ice cream?
Yeah, like an ice cream social. Yeah, or
Okay, Reggie.
Yeah. What's it? Pops. What is it?
Pop's Chocolate Shop.
Yes.
Like a malted shop or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what they're running. They're big Archie fans, especially the mid-century stuff.
The Double Digest.
Okay. I am sort of curious that like this idea of actually training your staff and developing their skills was such a shocking revelation to this boss. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised because I've certainly, I was in grad school. Like I've certainly seen the throw them into the water and the good ones will swim and the rest can drown mentality play out before. But like it's so, you see someone with promise and you bring them into your company and you're hoping to extract value out of them. Why would you not help them? Why would you not give them the tools that they need in order to actually make you money?
I just don't, just generally, I don't feel like managers are really encouraged to be teachers. It's considered something else. And so I'm not surprised. I feel like this is actually something that had to be told to people, especially since this was before the war. But what always strikes me about that time is it just seems like you could just walk into jobs. Like there wasn't the real sense that there was like a kind of like lifelong learning situation going on, that you just do one thing and you'll figure it out.
Yeah. So people held on to their jobs longer than they held on to their cars.
Yes, and you want to be as happy with your Chevrolet next month as you will be next year.
We want you to buy your next 10 cars from us, they say to a 50-something-year-old man.
And it's funny that he has to get that good advice from his own parents.
Well, specifically, he's got to get it from his dad.
Yeah.
This is nurturing coming from a crusty old man who likes to rock on the porch all night, drink lemonade, and put handkerchiefs on his head.
Yes, and he's trying to encourage a parental relationship with his younger salespeople, but it's just as close to like, perhaps you should take them outside and play catch with them while you give them some suggestions on how to sell these Chevrolets.
The endless car rides that they had to go on with their boss. Like, how miserable must those have been? Oh man, like the whole scene where Joel or whoever is saying, but he bought the car, like he buys the car, but it's like, but you could have done it better. You're going to make, this isn't always going to work out. You were lucky this time, but next time, not so much. Just like, oh my God, I see what you're doing.
Like even the actor himself who's playing the salesperson, he's just like, yes, sir, but he bought the car.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's there. It's on the screen.
But that is also a horrifying reality, as anyone who's ever been subject to performance reviews will know.
That's true.
Yeah, it can be very arbitrary, and also like, but maybe there is something to be said. Like there's a kernel of truth to that, but it's being told in the worst possible way at the worst possible time. Like I don't know if this is actually good managerial advice. The basic advice: train your staff, pay attention to them, don't expect them to figure everything out on their own,
and be a positive enforcer. Like don't drag them down.
Well, that's not what the movie said. I guess it does say it in one of the bullet points at the end, but it doesn't really illustrate that very well.
Apropos of nothing, what I love about this short, well, the whole Hired series, and I think I, like many people, am crying out for a belated Hired 3, Season of the Witch. But I love harsh faces.
Well, there's a lot of harsh faces. You're for sure for that.
Every man in this short looks like a very talented kid doing the meanest caricatures of his teachers. And I love it. They all have faces, especially the main guy, all have faces that look like Don Post Halloween masks.
I just love the handkerchief on the head moment. That's where this short gets all Manos-y for a second. I mean, I don't know if people ever actually do. They must. That can't have come out of the director, the actor's head fully formed.
But I'll go one further, is that what really makes the moment is not that he does it in some kind of like gentle way, or he's trying to like shade himself or cool himself off. He just has this stern, almost militaristic look on his face. And it's just like, this is normal. And that makes it so funny.
But it's also like, because this is one of the oldest films they did, and the 40s are just far enough away that you're just like, what's going on here? Like, you all had hats. Why aren't you wearing a hat?
It's quite hot out, and they're at home.
But a handkerchief is it? I mean, I guess they're felt hats. So, but yeah, you wouldn't wear felt hats on the porch. Is that what's going on?
I guess.
You didn't have a straw hat that you could put on.
Yeah,
to
where's
keep
your boater?
I mean, they're outside. It's getting late. The lemonade's running low, and the mosquitoes are coming out and starting to bite at you. They're about to head inside, which they do at the end of that segment of the short. So yeah, in this like temporary, before you're quite ready to go inside measure of keeping the mosquitoes away, I guess you put a cloth over your head.
Because you did have handkerchiefs. There was no disposable Kleenexes back then.
Yeah,
so everyone had their hanky.
Desperate snot rags in everyone's pocket.
Oh, Lord.
That mosquitoes couldn't stand. Listeners, if you know anything about using handkerchiefs to ward off mosquitoes, write into info at It's Just a Show and let us know more.
What they didn't tell you is that handkerchief was dipped in DDT.
Well, for those of you for whom this is your first episode, we don't just talk about the movies. We don't just talk about the shorts. We don't just talk about the skits. We like to talk about anything that was in the episode that struck our fancy. And so sometimes we have odd little things. And this time around, we're going to talk a little bit about bad cartoons from the comic strips pages.
Yes, the not-so-funnies.
The not-so-funnies.
Can I just say, aren't all funnies not so funnies?
Well, I have a conflicting opinion about Calvin and Hobbes, all because of the internet. Because I grew up loving Calvin and Hobbes, and I remember it having a smart, subtle humor, and a wonderful drawing style, and a really great character dynamic, not just with Calvin and Hobbes, but with the side characters like Mo the Bully and Susie, his on-again, off-again friends, but usually not when he was participating in gross meetings, gross being get rid of slimy girls. But there is a Calvin and Hobbes Twitter account that I follow because they repost Calvin and Hobbes comic strips, but they're always captioned with like, this is something parents can relate to, lol,
Oh, no.
and it ruins everything.
Wow.
So now it's retroactively tainted Calvin and Hobbes for me.
Now, the thing that was always genius about Calvin Hobbes, and especially the persona of Calvin, it was like, he's a nightmare child. Like, no child has ever been like this. Like, he's just he's got it dialed up to 200 all the time, you know? So No, it's not relatable. Not in any way.
No, and yet in a sense, it does make a lot of sense.
As a parent.
It does make a lot of sense.
Maybe it's because I have girls. I don't know.
It might be. But it does make sense in that, like, Calvin is shown to be intelligent, and it's usually, like, in my experience, that is, like, it's intelligent kids who act out because they are bored.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Your kids are dumb. That's not true. That's not true.
It might be a bit true.
That's not to say that all intelligent kids do that, but that's I think a common factor for kids who lash out. However, this show does nail one of the funnier comic strips. In fact, arguably the funniest comic strip of all, where they reference Gary Larson's Off-Center: The Far Side.
Yeah. So here's a thing that I want to say. I loved newspaper comic strips when I was a kid, and would read all but the most, like, Apartment 3G-ish ones.
What?
Apartment 3G was one of those, like, old...
Like Mark Trail.
Like Mark Trail,
Ooh.
or like some of the other soap opera-ish ones that were not even funny, were clearly aimed at adults, made no sense. You had to read them for years to get into them. I don't know. Those I would skip. But everything else, no matter like how dire it was, I would lap it up. And part of it was that I just didn't necessarily expect them to be funny per se.
Mm-hmm.
I just expected them to be doing something. You know, like I liked the drawing style. I still love that kind of simple post-Peanuts drawing style, which most comic strips are in. Not all of them, but most of them. And I just liked the little space of possibility that could happen in just 4 frames. Like, what could go on? Often it was nothing. And like, I knew that like Calvin and Hobbes or The Far Side were better than Blondie most days of the week.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't matter. I would still read Blondie because you never know. It's just like this little slice of something.
I mean, Blondie, at least, it told the same joke every time, but it was a joke. If anyone could ever tell me if there was ever a joke in Wizard of Id, or anything ever happened in that
BC's
comic.
the same story. There's no joke. Beetle Bailey, there's no joke.
These are all by the same people.
Yeah.
Those were all real legacy strips of that time. But yeah, but even then, I'd still read those. Like then, I wouldn't read them now, but I would still read them then. I don't know. There was an appeal to them.
What about Henry?
Henry, oh God,
Henry's about the kid who can't speak, who's bald.
That sounds tragic.
Oh, it's awful. It's always, Henry goes down to pick something up and something knocks him over the head. Speech balloon ? And that's it. That's every strip. It's awful.
Well, I mean, I'm just wondering if the problem is that it's not the content, it's the form. Like, I wonder if the form has just kind of doesn't really resonate with us anymore. Like, there's just other ways that you can do comics that isn't quite so limiting, and that, like, we don't read newspapers anymore, and whatever that kind of format was that allowed those funnies to proliferate then doesn't exist anymore. And so people have had to move on to other forms of entertainment, like podcasts.
Yeah, or webcomics. But have you seen the new Nancy?
The new
Yes.
Nancy's good.
The new Nancy is amazing. But I, of course, follow a Twitter account that posts all the new Nancys. I never see it in a newspaper or go out of my way to see it. But nevertheless, like, it's amazing.
It is, but it's also like the things that are most successful are strange returns, like Garfield minus Garfield, or I follow a Twitter account that follows all of the new Heathcliff
I do too.
comics.
That's great.
That is like the pinnacle of non-comedy, but like almost deliberately so. So like it still exists, but it has to have like this kind of like Adult Swim kind of Space Ghost coast to coast kind of veneer of like, we're taking something crappy and making it palatable again.
Honestly, I think that's exactly what they're doing with Heathcliff, because the last one I saw was Heathcliff in his house, standing defiantly in front of his owner, and his owner, who's just this old man, goes, "I guess you don't care about giants," and there's just this giant outside. And I'm like, but see, what would be really amazing.
Better if there was no giant outside.
What would be amazing is if rather than it's like, this is written by Brock Henderson, it's written by Billy, and it was like a 4-year-old, and it's like, oh, this is a great punchline, let's make this into a comic. If there was like a content farm of kids who are putting out Heathcliff, it would make more sense, and it would be almost all the better for it. Because some guy is contriving all of these, but like if it was just a kid being like, no, he just doesn't care about giants, and that's the joke. That's great. That's absolutely great. On the note of Garfield, though, and the transmutations of Garfield, now indeed Garfield really, in his purest form, is a series of award-winning cartoon specials where he's voiced by Lorenzo Musa. That's where Garfield works best.
That or that week-long segment where Garfield dies.
Yes, and he has to give into denial in order to be alive again. But I will say this. As a kid, I've never revisited them. But as a kid, while I loved, the Garfield I recognized from the cartoons, I preferred the strips as they originally came out in the 70s, because Garfield drawn not as a cat or weirdly human bipedal cat man as he's drawn these days, but Garfield drawn as almost a successor to the T-Rex. Like, he is bizarrely dinosaur-like in those early comics. He's really weird looking, and he's off-putting and ugly.
Oh, he's a terror lump.
I love it. I love when he looks like this angry dumpling. And I will say the comic strip, even though it's not the punchline that's the problem, it's the weakest setup. I think it's just John going, it's like, I can't find my pipe, and Garfield is smoking the pipe, but the image of this dinosaur cat smoking a pipe is funny.
What I always found interesting about Garfield, it was one of the few 3-paneled comics. They had a different flow for the rest of them, which were usually 4-paneled or single-paneled, right?
Yeah. And Jim Davis definitely figured out a formula of John says something, Garfield thinks something sarcastic, Garfield looks slyly to the reader in the final comic panel.
But, I mean, to the extent that comics are bad, or the joke, it's funny because, the comics were still going relatively strong when this joke was being made in the 90s.
Yeah.
I mean, Calvin Hobbes only lasted for 10 years, but I think at this point it was still in the funnies.
You're right. It went in around 95 or 96.
So it's funny that there's still a distinction between good and bad comics at this point, instead of them all being like, all the good people got out and all the bad people just kept running it into the ground.
I think it's a really interesting moment. There's something about that invention exchange / sketch which always, I don't know, gives me pause. It's weird to see comedy that's based upon talking about how other alleged sources of comedy aren't funny. I'm not even saying whether they're right or wrong. It's just a weird move. And it can backfire so much if people aren't finding that funny. Yeah. Which this is not the best invention exchange moment ever, but the rest of the episode is funny enough, so that's fine. But yeah, I there's just something sort of off-putting about that part of it.
And yet, when I think about one of my favorite jokes from the show, I need only look back on last episode, Bride of the Monster, where we have the no advertising sketch, and Joel keeps coming up with things that he can't find due to advertising, and finding out, oh, wait a minute, this rules. And he asks the all-powerful waffle wizard if he can find something from the mind of Billy Crystal. He just doesn't know where to look, and of course, because there's no advertising, he'll never find it. And we just see Joel go, yes. And that's great.
I don't even know if that's as much a dig at Billy Crystal as like the omnipresence of a certain set of ads around that time, right?
I don't know.
I mean, I can see it being either way, but like, it's not like, I don't know. I don't know if that's entirely like, oh, I'll never have to hear of Billy Crystal again, or just like, I won't be pestered to think about Billy Crystal, right? That's a slightly different thing. I don't know. Than saying Kathy isn't funny.
It's funny because Kathy in particular has had like a kind of reassessment in the last few years, because the creator, Kathy, I forget her last name. Guys White, put out a series of essays where she kind of talks about her life, and she basically makes the point that, I made these comics at a very weird moment for women where they were just entering the workforce for the first time and trying to negotiate that space and how much power they had in that situation. And so she feels like a lot of women these days are embarrassed by the comic strip because her failure and her as a human being and her inability to develop is just so embarrassing. It seems like she's kind of stuck in this state where she can't move past, but she couldn't, because like the glass ceiling was so pronounced back then, and like you were so vulnerable as a woman in those spaces in ways that you aren't anymore. And it's just like it feels like she was suggesting, and other people have suggested it as well, that there's like this shunting aside, like, oof, I'm not like that. I have never been that pathetic, and so that's a lot. Whereas like that's what that author liked to focus on, are like the little failures in life that you never quite get over, like those moments where you can't actually help but eat the pie. That's what she wants to focus on.
You had me until you said that. So then it's like, no, that's just a trite punchline.
I mean, making fun of Kathy, even back in the 80s and 90s, was easy. It was a cliche.
It's not hacky, it's acky.
Exactly. Making fun of Kathy was as hacky as Kathy's punchlines sometimes were, right? And it felt like it was sort of low-hanging fruit. And I don't know, like, yeah, they were trite punchlines especially, but part of that's because the strip had been going on for a long time and people were familiar with it, and like it had explored this corner and wasn't moving on to new things, because comics don't. Like that's part of their job. But it also, I think, was kind of easy to make fun of because it was about a woman, and it wasn't about an attractive woman. It wasn't about Blondie. It was about a woman who had no nose and weird straight hair and said ack and was embarrassed about her bathing suit options.
And I remember those being a lot of the strips, honestly. I read Kathy.
Yeah. Like I read Kathy a lot.
There's a lot of bathing suit ones.
I actually looked at a picture of one that it was the pie one, where it's basically a joke about her, because she's saying like the four big guilts of the world. It's like your food, your looks, your career, and your mother. And that's basically what it all revolves around. And there's this picture where like her mom's basically saying like, you don't need to eat that pie. She's like, but I want to eat the pie. And she's like, fine, just eat the pie. And the joke is like, she's basically like, my mom made me eat the pie. But there's the look of utter joy on her face where she's about to just dip this pie into her mouth because she's won. And just like, actually, I kind of love this strip now. I got the pie.
Kathy's main value as a punchline or cultural artifact comes from 30 Rock, in which Liz Lemon freaks out and finally says, ack.
I don't know what the Far Side is doing amongst these unfunny cartoons.
That's the weird thing, and that always rubbed my friends the wrong way when I showed them this episode. Is I was like, no, the Far Side rules.
Well, I think they're saying that, aren't they? Because they're like Gary Larson's offset of the Far Side. Like they're saying like this is a good one, and we're mixing it with something that's not good.
That's the description, but all the other comic strips that are combined together, and indeed the very premise of it, is that we're combining two unfunny things to create somehow two wrongs making a right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although, like many of the sketches, they sometimes forget where they started from by the time they get to that point. So I don't know. I don't want to put too much on it.
I always felt like Crow's intonation revealed that they actually respected Larson, and it wasn't like a put down.
No diss.
Yeah.
I should ask. It's like, what do you think is the most endearing and enduring of all of these comic strips that you've read?
Of all the comics that I've read?
Yeah, like which one stands out to you the most as like the one that has that special place in your heart and has, I think, a certain kind of palatability for a large audience?
I mean, there's literally the complete Peanuts.
I'm asking
right
for the listeners. I'm asking for the listeners who can't see this. This is a radio program, and I'm the goddamn shadow.
We should mention to the listeners. So there's like 30.
Something like that. It's the entire 50-year run of Peanuts from Fantagraphics in the hardcover. They're in the living room where we're recording this.
It's like 2 library shelves full of Peanuts comics.
It's even got the one where President Obama gives his intro.
That's a terrible introduction.
Yeah, he blames drone strikes on fucking Pigpen.
There's a ton of them, though. I mean, obviously, the complete Calvin and Hobbes is right behind you. I've got a significant amount of Doonesbury upstairs, which, I actually like because it's still running and I don't read newspapers. I'm way behind every couple decades. I try to catch up on what's been going on in Doonesbury, but it's getting harder and harder.
My husband was an immense fan of Bloom County.
Bloom County, it was pretty good. Pretty good. Had its moments. Absolutely. I've got a tremendous amount of Crazy Cat if you want to go way back upstairs. Amazing to have a, non-binary character introduced in 1913. Absolutely. I mean, Popeye also would have been a non-binary character, but he never meant quite as much to me, I'll admit. Or they. I don't know what. Popeye's fine with any pronoun, so it's all good.
Yeah, they am what they am.
Exactly. I feel like those are all really basic answers. Either two of you have something to add to that?
I grew up with Archie comics, and to some extent, I'll always have a soft spot. But I always vastly preferred, because the digest would be just like a couple new comics, but then they would have like recycle everything from over the decades. And the ones from the 40s were always the best ones by far. More clever, more sharp, more funny. And I don't even think that they recycle the ones from that decade anymore, but they were my favorite by far.
Were those the newspaper comics, or were they published in comic books?
They were published in comic books.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you have a favorite newspaper comic?
Newspaper comic? Definitely Family Circus.
No. Really?
No.
I believed you for like half a minute.
I just love connecting dotted lines. I can't help it.
I think The Far Side.
Yeah.
It was. I was amazed at what you could do with just one panel.
And also, Gary Larson's drawings themselves make you laugh. I will always find his dumpy protagonists, and you could be a dog, you could be a squirrel, you could be a human being, you will be the dumpiest, most pathetic looking person, and I absolutely love that about The Far Side. And sometimes the jokes were insanely elaborate, but sometimes they were just simple, and they made you laugh with how blunt his drawing style really hit those notes. Like there's one, I think it's the cover of one of the editions, but I could be wrong. It is a strip, but I think it was like famous enough to be used as a cover, where there is a door that says pull, and you have this dumpy looking kid with glasses leaning against it, pushing it, really depressed that he can't get in.
That was up in the administrative office of the high school for the allegedly gifted that I went to. I'm very familiar with that comic.
Was that the name of the high school, by the way?
That's what I call it now. Yes.
Although I do have a comic strip that has a special place in my heart, despite the fact that it comes from the terrible tradition of dramatic comic strips, your horrendous Mark Trails, your Dick Tracys and whatnot. I love newspaper Spider-Man, because I would look to it thinking, I love Spider-Man. If you condense this into 3 panels, well, that's going to be amazing. You'll get a whole Spider-Man story in 3 panels. But what you get is just Peter Parker's thoughts throughout the day. And every now and then he thinks, what if I have to become Spider-Man? And there's the inevitable final panel of Peter Parker where half his face is Spider-Man and the other half is Peter Parker screaming, while a thought balloon of, what if I have to become Spider-Man happens. And in reality, the next strip is just him going to the dentist and realizing, oh, nothing happens in Spider-Man. Like, it seemed like a secret joke. The reality is that Stan Lee wrote them all in a week. But the sheer madness of how quickly these things were made resulted in, I think, one of the great unintentionally comedic artworks.
Now, some people know us as that Canadian podcast they listen to. And they're waiting to hear us talk about For Better or For Worse.
No, always for worse.
It was fine.
It was fine.
It was genial.
It was very genial, which is fine. Like, that's part of the thing that you go to the comics page for. There are a lot of things that you can go to it for, but one of it is to just have a genial moment in the middle of news about the oncoming nuclear holocaust.
And then she decided to kill off the dog.
Yeah. And then everyone. Oh, at least the strip.
Yeah.
They didn't all commit seppuku, did they? Because that is definitely for worse.
We have been going on for a little bit of time about Manos, the Hands of Fate, about Hired, about various things mentioned in this episode. Did either of you come prepared with one more thing to talk about before we finally let our listeners listen to a different podcast?
No, I'm Manosed out.
I just want to say this music score is bad. And you should feel bad if you like it.
Wrong! Well, I have one more thing I want to bring up, or I want to ask you about. Early on in the movie, in that lovely opening sequence before the lovely singing comes in, there's a moment when we cut to one of the winding roads of El Paso, and Joel swings over, and I think he hits Crow while shouting out "Slug Bug."
Slug bug. Ow!
Yes, and I got into arguments with people about this.
Oh, what were the arguments about?
I said that it should be Slug Bug, and not what they suggested, which is Punch Buggy.
This was the thing I was going to get to, yes.
But Punch Buggy allowed you to say the color.
But Slug Bug is a pleasing rhyme, and slug is a way better way to describe a punch than just punch. There's poetry to it.
Now that you say that, I'm trying to remember which one I grew up with, because we would say the colors, but I thought I grew up with Slug Bug. Maybe I grew up with Punch Buggy and didn't hear Slug Bug until then.
We didn't either.
You didn't do either?
I don't know. Where I grew up, there weren't a lot of Volkswagens around when I was growing up. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's because I was in a very rural area, but we didn't see them much. Not enough to punch each other.
A bug was something to be celebrated.
Did you have either of them where you grew up?
That's just it. There was no punch buggy, no slug bug. It first came out because of MST3K, and I did it to someone, and at first they were like, "Ow, my arm," and then they said, "Wait, what did you say?" And I explained, it's like, well, it's a slug bug. You punch somebody, but it's like, no, you mean a punch buggy. And everybody had heard of punch buggy, and it was a real Berenstain Bears moment for me.
I can't remember. Dang, I'll have to ask my brother. It's a game that seemed fun for about 5 minutes. And then I was like, you know what? I don't either want to hit my friends or be hit by them, actually.
One of the games that we did like to play was that you would...
oh, no.
I assure you, it's quite G-rated.
I was hoping it would be G-rated.
So you would pick up horses when you're...
What?
Horses?
It's not G-rated anymore for
not literally.
Equus.
Like you'd look out your side of the window, and if you saw a horse, you say horse, 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 and you start counting them all, and you have to, like, whoever had the most horses won. But if a graveyard went past you, then you had to be like, oh, all my horses are buried. Because all your horses died in the cemetery.
Did by any chance, Beth, did your parents die of dysentery?
Look, we're again rural area. Lots of horses out.
Lots of graveyards.
Yeah, and lots of cemeteries.
I just like the idea of children going, "Yay, horses! Oh no, all my horses are dead."
Is this a game that you've passed on to your children?
Yeah, I'm trying to teach them, but they're really bad at counting horses. And they're liars. They lie about the number of horses they see.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you're Jackie Neiman Jones, or if you'd like to ask us anything, please get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at @itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. And this show is made possible by listeners like you. For as little as $1 an episode, you can help us research and record this show, and you can listen to all our superfan bonus bits. Find out more by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And you can be as cool as these people who've helped us along the way. Thank you, Chad,
Jeff,
Charlotte,
Michael,
John,
Father Jeff,
James,
Steve,
Dana,
Andrew,
Chris,
Jessica,
Luke,
April,
Lynn,
Brian,
Jean and Marty,
Tim,
Allison,
Christian,
Jess,
Lars,
Jeffrey,
Lisa Marie,
Fresky,
Matthew,
Pepe,
Joshua,
Nick.
Aaron.
and Deborah, and everybody else who's helped us along the way in all sorts of different ways. That address again is itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/100. Beth, get out of here. We got another episode to do.
Yeah.
Immediately?
No, you can stick around for a few more minutes.
What is it you're going to be doing?
Oh, let's see. After Manos, what can we do after Manos? Well,
Ooh, I have an idea.
what's your idea?
Well, there's something in the air, and I think it's the fresh scent of Brute, man.
Oh, no. I guess we'll have to do Season 7, Episode 2, The Brute Man, featuring the chicken of tomorrow.
Ooh. Season 7, Beth. Are you tempted to stay?
Well, this is just like I have said that there's not a bad season 7, and this one's not bad. I don't have a lot of memories about it, except for gooey, very very gooey.
Are you thinking of
You
the
think of
Incredible
Melting
Melting Man?
This is the Rondo Hatton.
Yeah, the guy with the long face.
Okay, no, then I obviously don't remember this at all.
I mean, the chicken one's gooey, and the eggs are full of goo.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a big egg in it in one of the skits, I think.
Yes.
They have that really creepy.
The embryo.
Yeah, the embryo, the skinny chicken to the fat chicken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot that you're going to be able to dig into.
Oh, great. We get to do a segment about factory farming.
Oh, boy.
There's no truck farmer, I got to say that.
Oh, yay.
Well, don't worry. The story of Rondo Hatton is far more pleasant.
All right. Well, thank you, Adam and Beth, for the past now 100 episodes. This has been a wild trip. Thank you, listeners, for joining us on this journey, and especially, of course, those of you who've helped us out through Patreon, but everybody who's listened, and everybody who's told a friend, and everybody who's been so cool. Thank you.
Yeah, we would not have this show without you. And who would have thought that would start off as a Canadian love letter to an American show that was seldom seen in Canada would have legs?
And hopefully we've encouraged some of you Americans to check out some of our weirder Canadian fare.
Yes, finally, there's going to be Americans doing a podcast about street legal.
About the raccoons.
Hey, it could be called Run With Us.
I would listen to
Raccoons
it.
Podcast. Yeah. Oh, man. I honestly, I really would love to see a fan film that is a remake of Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood called There Will Be Sneer.
All right. But until that happens, we'll be back next time with the Brute Man. But until then,
The end?
As I get older, I walk more and more like Torgo does.
how proud your parents must be. Take it away, Theme Squad.
I got a million things I want you to know. I could talk off your ear for a year or so. But time is running short, we all gotta go. Come on, sit back, relax, it's just a show. Do you like Joel or Mike or Gypsy or Crow? Or Dr. F, TV's Frank, or Tom Servo? Or even Pearl Brain Guy, Professor Bobo? Or that new guy, relax, it's just a show. Post roll call. Chris?
Okay. All right. Fine.
Beth?
I spent the better part of a decade learning something.
Adam?
You guessed it, Donald
So
Pleasance.
let's watch Gamera and Daddy-O and Manos, Hands of Fate and Mitchell and Gorgo and Final Sacrifice and Monster a Go-Go. It's MST3K, it's just a show. Come on, sit back, relax, it's just a show.
People love this idea of a Satanist.